Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crime Stories for Sleep. I'm Robert, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they are essential to help the channel grow and allow me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let us dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. Beneath the towering presence of the Stellenbosch Mountains, where the breeze carried a faint hint of ripening vineyards and the distant murmur of youthful voices, Hannah Cornelius lived a life woven from quiet dreams and gentle ambitions. Born on February 12, 1996, in Cape Town, South Africa, she was the firstborn daughter of William and Anna Cornelius, parents whose careers in law painted a life of stability and principles. William served as a judge in a neighboring town, his days burdened with the serious responsibility of verdicts that aimed to balance justice with mercy. Anna, a lawyer by profession, applied her sharp mind to cases requiring both compassion and resolve. Their home radiated warmth and hope, a place where books lined the shelves and conversations often turned to the broader questions of morality in a nation still healing from its turbulent past. Hannah's childhood unfolded like a gentle melody on the piano she would come to master. As a young girl, she possessed a nature that noticed the overlooked, the stray animal in the garden, the quiet grief of those around her, and offered help without fanfare. 3 years after her birth, her brother arrived, a son who would face the challenges of profound autism. Hannah became his steadfast protector, patient and resourceful in her efforts to bridge the gaps his condition created. She would spend countless hours beside him, turning lessons into games, her voice a soothing presence during his moments of distress. This innate compassion defined her essence, a quality that seemed to flourish naturally in the nurturing soil of her family's values. Education revealed Hannah's exceptional abilities in ways that amazed even her closest friends. At Redden's House, a private school in Somerset West, she immersed herself in drama classes, where her theatrical gifts lit up the stage, earning praise for performances that captured the raw edges of human emotion. Music was her other refuge. Her hands moved across piano keys with a precision that spoke of deep devotion. In academic pursuits, she excelled, completing her studies with 6 distinctions and an overall grade exceeding 85%, a testament to her dedication and curiosity. But Hannah was not a solitary scholar. She was popular, her laughter easy and infectious, her circle of friends a vibrant tapestry of shared adventures. There had been a teenage romance with a young man named Fellow, accompanying her to the formal dance. Her father's reluctant approval of her emerging independence, concealing a deeper sense of protectiveness. On the night of May 26, 2017, that world shifted abruptly, though Hannah remained unaware. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the gentle hum of a Friday evening winding down. Hannah, now 21 years old, had spent the earlier hours with friends at a local pub, the sort of casual gathering that defined student culture. Laughter circulated as freely as the drinks, stories flitting among the group like bright insects in the dim lighting. Among them was Cheslin Marsh, a peer whose easygoing nature had seamlessly integrated him into the night's assembly. As the hour advanced into the late night, Hannah offered to give Cheslin a ride home in her grandmother's Volkswagen Polo, a modest blue car that purred reliably along the town's winding streets. The back to Stellenbosch began uneventfully, the headlights slicing through the darkness as they chatted about coursework, plans, the small oddities of college life. Cheslin lived in student housing in the Neathlingshof suburb, a peaceful neighborhood where streets narrowed and houses clustered tightly. It was approximately 2:00 a.m. when they pulled up outside his residence, the engine idling softly as they lingered in conversation, reluctant to end the evening. The street was silent, lit by the faint glow of street lamps. The only sounds were the distant chirping of insects and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Hannah leaned back in the driver's seat, her blonde hair catching the light, a smile playing on her lips. Cheslin, seated beside her, felt the peace of the moment, unaware that darkness was shifting just beyond the car's boundaries. Unseen until it was irreversible. 4 figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with predatory silence, their forms materializing like ghosts from the darkness. Vernon Whitboy, age 33, led them, his face hardened by years of petty crime and evasion. Alongside stood Geraldo Parsons, age 27, whose reckless anger masked deep instability. Nashville Julius, age 29, and Eben Van Niekerk, age 28, followed close behind, each carrying their shared history from the margins of society. They called themselves the Wolf Pack, an informal gang born from township hardship, where opportunities were scarce and life often meant taking what wasn't rightfully theirs. Armed with a screwdriver and a knife, they surrounded the vehicle in seconds, their eyes gleaming with intent. The assault was quick and vicious. A sudden bang on the window shattered the peace, followed by the metallic glint of a blade against glass. "Open up," one of them snarled, his voice low and menacing. Fear washed over Cheslin and Hannah like an icy flood. She fumbled with the lock, her hands trembling, while Cheslin's mind scrambled for an escape that didn't exist. The doors gave way, and the men piled inside. 2 took the back seats, Whitboy sliding into the front beside Cheslin, shoving him toward the rear. Hannah was wedged between the front seats, her body a barrier of dread as Parsons took the wheel and the car lurched forward. The engine roared as they sped away, the kidnappers' headlights fading in the mirror. Inside the cramped interior, the air grew thick with menace. The men barked orders, their voices overlapping into a harsh chorus demanding money, cell phones, valuables. Cheslin tried to stay calm, whispering to Hannah to hold steady, his assurances a fragile thread of hope. "It'll be okay," he murmured, though doubt pounded in his chest. Hannah's eyes, wide with terror, met his for a moment. A wordless plea exchanged between them. The gang rifled through their belongings, seizing jewelry and cash with rough, invasive hands. At first driving aimlessly, the car wound through Stellenbosch's edges toward a nearby gas station. Later, CCTV from the station would capture the distressing scene. The car pulling up under harsh fluorescent lights, one of the men, Julius, dragging Cheslin toward an ATM. "Give us the PIN," he growled. The knife's presence demanded compliance. Under duress, Cheslin's mind went blank, providing an incorrect code in his panicked confusion. Rage erupted. They shoved him back into the car, their fury heightened by the failed transaction. Hannah sat silent in front, staring straight ahead as if willing the nightmare to dissolve like mist. The journey grew grimmer, veering to a secluded dirt track on the town's outskirts, where urban lights surrendered to vast fields and suffocating silence. Here, the gang's violence intensified. They dragged Cheslin from the car into nearby bushes. Bricks appeared from the roadside, crude weapons of sudden brutality. "Lie down," Whitboy ordered coldly. Cheslin complied, curling on the frigid earth as the first blow landed. Pain exploded through his skull, his vision swimming in red. More blows followed as each man took a turn, until they assumed he was dead. Blood pooled beneath him, his breathing faint and ragged. They left him there, a broken figure among the brush, believing their work was done. Miraculously, hours later, Cheslin stirred. His body was racked with pain. Partial deafness muffled the world around him. Fractures riddled his frame. Yet a powerful will to survive pushed him to drag himself toward the road. He flagged down a stranger, words tumbling out in ragged breaths. A tale of the car, the men, Hannah. Help came swiftly, but Hannah was gone, vanished into the darkness once Cheslin was removed from the picture. Attention turned fully to her now. The men drove on with her small frame now confined within the trunk, each bump on the rough road its own torment. They reached a dilapidated drug den on the outskirts, a shabby shack familiar to Whitboy, a temporary refuge. There, amid the stale smoke and decay, they pulled her out. The air reeked sharply of crystal meth. The men pressured her to partake. Cannabis circulated, a perverse gesture. Meth glittered under a bare bulb's light. Hannah, exhausted and terrified, initially refused, but intimidation wore down her resistance. Drugs clouded her mind, a chemical haze numbing fear yet intensifying the terror of what came next. One man, Parsons, proposed a deal. Cooperation for freedom. In their warped reasoning, it was negotiation, though Hannah's silence spoke volumes. They didn't free her. Instead, they forced her back into the car, heading to a deserted paintball park. Fields wild and silent in the pre-dawn hours that stretched endlessly. The assault occurred there. Multiple assaults. The gang took turns, their actions robotic and inhumane. The night's cold seeped into her bones. Her screams went unheard. Dawn's first light painted the horizon as they drove again to Nuitdach Farm Road, a sprawling vineyard. Their plan, prosecutors claim, further violence among the vines. But something changed. Hannah, summoning desperate strength, started resisting. She clung to the trunk's edge, tried pulling herself out, nails scraping metal, a final act of defiance. Panic or irritation flashed in the men's eyes. She wouldn't get out, Parsons testified, his voice monotone in the courtroom. She held onto the car, started panicking. Even Van Niekerk stepped forward, blade gripped tightly. A swift, brutal thrust to her throat briefly stilled her resistance. But this didn't satisfy them. Blows rained down in a torrent, her body collapsing onto the earth. Then came the ultimate horror. A heavy rock, weighing 82 pounds and meant for sealing a boar burrow, was lifted by Whitboy and slammed twice upon her head as she was held down. The impact was catastrophic, extinguishing her life in a moment of profound cruelty. Her lifeless body rested among the vineyard's quiet potential, the rising sun casting detached light over the scene. The group didn't linger in reflection. Intoxicated by their perceived invincibility and the drugs coursing through them, they continued in the hijacked Polo. In Kraravnine, they spotted a woman heading to her job, her solitary presence making her an easy target. They pursued her, grabbing her purse and phone in a quick burst, her cries fading as they sped away. Knowing that their luck was running out. Plainclothes officers, alerted by Cheslin's survival and the vehicle's description, spotted the Polo on a main road. A high-speed chase ensued, sirens piercing the morning commute, ending in squealing brakes and the clatter of arrests. The men were taken into custody on May 28th and 29th, 2017. Whitboy, Parsons, Julius, and Van Niekerk, still reeking of the night's excesses, with Hannah's blood staining the car's interior. News of the atrocity spread rapidly through Stellenbosch, a university town unaccustomed to such visceral brutality, piercing its picturesque facade. Students whispered in dorms, parents clutched their children tighter, and the community reeled from the loss of someone so bright. Hannah's remains had been discovered earlier that day by two technicians servicing borehole pumps while driving on the farm road. They came upon her partially clothed body, the large stone nearby, her features marred beyond recognition from the trauma. Identification was achieved through fingerprints, a procedural harshness that preceded the devastating notification to her family. William Cornelius was at his home when police arrived. The knock at the door was an omen he couldn't ignore. Their daughter, their vibrant Hannah, was gone in the most dreadful way imaginable. He went to the morgue, his vision blurred by tears, bracing for the unthinkable. Anna returned shortly after, her lawyer's composure fracturing under the weight. Their son, already navigating life's challenges, couldn't fully grasp the void, his lack of understanding both a mercy and an agony. The investigation proceeded with urgency. Forensic teams scoured the polo, the paintball site, and the vineyard. DNA evidence irrefutably linked the men to the crimes. Cheslin's account, though given from a hospital bed, painted a clear picture of the abduction. Witnesses from the gas station confirmed the timeline, and the gang's own boasting in a drug hideout unraveled during questioning. Charges mounted: murder, sexual assault, attempted killing, aggravated robbery, abduction. The Western Cape High Court in Cape Town would host the trial, a case that captured national attention and fueled debates about South Africa's ongoing struggles with gender-based violence and crime. As legal proceedings moved steadily forward, the Cornelius family faced grief's relentless tide. William and Anna channeled their sorrow into action by establishing the Hannah Cornelius Foundation to support disadvantaged young people in Stellenbosch through education and mentorship, a path away from the poverty and violence cycles that had claimed their daughter. Hannah was always compassionate, a close friend would say, deeply moved by people's stories and struggles. This foundation became her legacy, a beacon of light amid the gloom, though incapable of filling what remained absent. The trial began in 2018, a grueling sequence of testimonies laying bare that night's horrors before all present. Prosecutor Eric Ntabazalila delivered arguments meticulously, calling experts who detailed autopsy findings, numerous stab wounds plus blunt force trauma, indicating a prolonged, brutal attack endured silently until finally heard aloud in court now. Forever echoing through memory lanes, traveled together once upon better times, shared among loved ones gathered close seeking. In October 2018, following weeks of testimony, Judge Guyat Salelof convicted Witbooi, Parsons, and Van Niekerk on all main charges: murder, rape, the attempted murder of Cheslin, robbery, and kidnap. Julius was found guilty on lesser offenses. His role was considered contributory rather than hands-on in the murder. The courtroom erupted in silence as verdicts were delivered in November. The three primary offenders received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Collectively, they were sentenced to 358 years in prison. Applause broke out from the public gallery, a visceral release of comfort and rage, though it couldn't bring Hannah back. William delivered a statement during sentencing, his voice a heartfelt lament. "Our family died with Hannah," he said, giving voice to unspeakable pain. "We are the remains living in the ruins." He described Anna's decline. Her once vibrant essence faded. Just a year after Hannah's death, in May 2018, Anna went for her routine swim in the Atlantic Ocean near Cape Town. The sea was cold and turbulent, conditions she knew well. Her body was found in the surf, ruled an accidental drowning, but William shared his doubts. She went into the ocean and never came back. She didn't have the physical or emotional strength. Anna's death left William and their son adrift, their anchor, their fragile connections severed. Time passed, the trial's repercussions spreading across South Africa. Hannah's memory lived on not only as a victim, but as a symbol of kindness and light. Cheslin, rebuilding his life, spoke about the complexity of forgiveness. His hearing loss served as a permanent reminder. The foundation expanded, supporting numerous children, transforming Hannah's compassion into tangible progress. William's health deteriorated. Cancer emerged 3 months after Hannah's death, a harsh addition to their grief. He fought bravely but passed away on December 9, 2022, entrusting their son to family care. The group of attackers faded into obscurity within prison. Their lives became a minor footnote to the life they destroyed. Yet Hannah's story endures, a poignant reminder of fragility in a nation of sharp contrasts. In Stellenbosch's vineyards, where she took her last breath, the grapes continue to ripen in an endless cycle. Her legacy resonates through the Foundation's work, in friends who preserve her joy, in the community's resolve to confront darkness. The murder of Hannah Cornelius was more than a crime. It was a tear in humanity's fabric, imperfectly mended by memory and law. For those who loved her, grief lingers as a silent companion. But so does the light she shared, proof of a life that, though violently ended, brightened the world around her. Story 2. The salty breeze over Watson's Bay carried a chill that wasn't just from the tail end of winter. It was a deep, unsettling cold that seemed to radiate from the sheer cliffs of the Gap, a place where the Tasman Sea endlessly crashes against Sydney's edge. On the evening of August 5th, 2013, that coldness seeped into the heart of the Marsden family and never left. It began, like so many modern tragedies, with a series of text messages, tiny glowing screens bearing the weight of a life. Teresa Marsden, a mother whose world revolved around her 4 children, felt a nagging unease she couldn't quite shake. Her eldest daughter, Renee, aged 20, was out having dinner with friends, or so she had said. But a strange, ominous message had come from Renee's boyfriend, Braden Spotty. "Get your daughter under control," it read, threatening suicide. Teresa's heart skipped. She had confronted Renee, who was at home, looking pale and distant. Renee had dismissed it. "Don't be ridiculous," she'd said, her voice thin. "I'd never do that." She'd then explained that her relationship with Braden was over, that she had finally seen his true nature. The finality in her voice was alarming, but Teresa, caught up in the chaos of raising 3 other children, let the moment pass. Now, hours later, with Renee not answering her calls, the anxiety had exploded into full-blown terror. And at 8:18 p.m., Teresa's hands trembled as she texted Renee's closest friend, Camila Zan. "Hi, have you heard from Renee?" Camila responded within a minute. "She texted me earlier. Is she okay?" Camila recounted that Renee had sent a final, sorrowful message at 5:47 p.m. "I'm sorry for everything I've done. You'll always be my best friend. I hope someday you can forgive me. I love you so much. Love, always." Soon, Camila arrived at the Marsden home, a picture of steady, worried friendship. Volunteering to help in the search, they drove through the dark streets, checking places Renee might have gone. A McDonald's outlet, the home of Braden's alleged sister in Glenhaven. But every lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, police, alerted by a desperate Teresa, had begun their investigation. Through cell phone data, they traced the last ping from Renee's phone to the area of Old Southhead Road, Vaucluse, near the Gap. Her phone had been turned off at 5:58 p.m. or around 8:45 p.m. A police car found it. Renee's Mazda 2, parked neatly on Military Road, roughly 150 meters from the stairs leading up to the clifftop lookout. The car was empty. Inside, officers discovered a Valentine's card from Braden and her purse containing a collage of photos with her loved ones. On the dew-dampened windshield, a finger had traced the words, "B loves R," and "Braden loves Renee." But there was no sign of the young woman herself. A joint ground and aerial search began, its beams slicing uselessly through the thick darkness. The churning waters below kept their secret. The following dawn, as a dull light spread across the sea, Teresa Marsden, walking near where the car was found, came upon something that crushed any remaining hope. Arranged neatly beside an old gun emplacement were her daughter's shoes. Renee had vanished. Her body, carried away into the vast, uncaring sea, was never recovered. The initial verdict was heartbreakingly straightforward. A young woman, devastated by a broken romance, had taken her own life at a notorious suicide spot. But for the Marsden family, this wasn't closure. It was the beginning of an awful realization, a journey into a web of lies so intricate and cruel it seemed unimaginable. They sensed something was wrong. Their effervescent, vivacious Renee wouldn't have done this alone. They wanted to speak with the person at the center of it all. They wanted answers from Braden Spati. But they, along with law enforcement, were about to discover that you can't get answers from a ghost. Renee Marsden was a presence who lit up any room. Standing only 152 centimeters tall, she was small in stature, but her personality was immense. She had a loud, infectious laugh and a bright, bubbly demeanor that drew people to her. Her birth date was October 15th, 1992. She was Teresa Marsden's first child. Her biological parents separated when she was 2, and she and Teresa formed an inseparable bond, more like best friends than mother and daughter. When Teresa met and married Mark Marsden, who loved Renee as his own, their family expanded. Renee relished her role as big sister to her 3 younger siblings, Luke, Jake, and Monique Dot. She was caring, compassionate, and fiercely loyal to her family. At 18, she chose to legally adopt Mark's surname, symbolizing the love she held for the man who had raised her. But beneath the cheerful facade lay a vulnerability, a deep craving for love and acceptance. This yearning would become the crack through which a destructive lie would infiltrate her world. And the architect of that lie was the person she trusted most beyond her family, her best friend, Camila Zan. Their friendship was forged in the hallways of Mount St. Benedict's College, a Catholic girls' school. Their connection was powerful and all-consuming, but from the start, it was shadowed by a controlling, dark quality. Those close to Renee noticed a change in her behavior. The once social teenager grew more withdrawn. Her grades dropped, and she began skipping classes with Camila. Stephanie Harner, Renee's cousin, remembered Renee saying that Camila would push and hit her, leaving visible bruises. Fear was taking hold. By around 2008, the relationship evolved in a way that alarmed Renee's parents. Teresa found affectionate notes from Camila to Renee, revealing the obsessive depth of Camila's feelings. Renee confided to her mother that Camila had tried to kiss her, and that she felt scared by her friend's unpredictable behavior, which swung between aggression and seduction. The Marsden family tried to intervene, arranging meetings with the school and Camila's parents in an effort to break the toxic bond. But Camila's influence was pervasive. When Teresa threatened to take away Renee's phone, Camila provided her with a secret one, a hidden means to maintain their contact. For a time, Renee managed to create distance. She enrolled in a TAF course in hairdressing and began dating a boy named Angus Young in 2010. Angus described her as upbeat, cheerful, and full of life. But Camila couldn't stand being shut out. Her behavior escalated. She began stalking Renee, lurking outside her workplace, showing up unexpectedly wherever Renee went. Once at a library, she cornered a frightened Renee and whispered menacingly that as long as Renee ignored her calls, she would continue following her. The stalking became so unbearable that Renee eventually quit her TAF course to escape it. The situation came to a head at a coffee shop where Renee, with her mother there for moral support, tried to formally end the friendship. Camila became hysterical, grabbing Renee's arm and pleading repeatedly that she didn't mean it as Teresa physically intervened to free her daughter. For a while afterward, there was separation, but the connection, however twisted, remained. By late 2011, Camila had re-entered Renee's life, and she brought what seemed like a gift. She told Renee about a friend she thought Renee would really connect with. His name was Braden Spati. Braden Spati seemed like the perfect boyfriend crafted from digital illusion. He was handsome, attentive, and completely devoted to Renee. There was only one catch. He was incarcerated at Goulburn Prison for a driving accident that had killed his best friend. This fabricated backstory was a brilliant manipulative stroke. It explained why he could never meet Renee in person or answer her calls directly. He could only text, using a contraband phone smuggled into his cell. The prison setting lent an air of romantic tragedy, painting him as a flawed but redeemable figure whom Renee could love and support. Camila served as the only intermediary. She claimed she had connected them through text messages in November 2011 and alleged she had helped Braden get the illegal phone through his lawyer. From that point on, Renee's life became anchored to her phone's glowing screen. The romance with Braden was an intense digital whirlwind. They texted constantly, over 11,000 messages in just one 3-month period in 2013 alone. And he became deeply woven into her daily existence, despite being entirely fictional. Renee felt deeply for him and told her mother she was in love. As proof of her unwavering commitment, in January 2012, accompanied by Camila at a tattoo studio, she had Bipiri permanently inked on the right side of her chest. Braden proved to be a jealous and controlling partner who isolated Renee, resenting time she spent with others. Their dynamic was an emotional roller coaster, masterminded by the puppeteer operating in plain sight. Camila herself, always available as the supportive best friend, offering comfort or mediating disputes between them. Seamlessly weaving messages into a deception so bold, it sometimes involved Braden advising Renee on how to resolve conflicts with Camila herself. This elaborate fabrication began straining real-life relationships. In early 2013, Renee became engaged to a co-worker named Ian, but her obsession with Braden persisted. He issued an ultimatum, forcing her to choose between him and Ian. She broke off the engagement, sacrificing a concrete relationship for an imagined one. In her final weeks alive, she eagerly shared wedding website ideas with coworkers, believing wholeheartedly in a future with Braden. Throughout everything, she confided in only a trusted circle, including her ever-present confidante, Camila. She was completely unaware that the jealous, overbearing friend she struggled to manage and the devoted, controlling boyfriend she adored were one and the same person. Camila was playing both roles, spinning a web so intricate that Renee was utterly trapped. Investigators would later determine that Camila's goal wasn't to torment Renee, but to possess her entirely, shutting out everyone else. She couldn't bear to be less important than any man in Renee's life. By creating Braden, she could satisfy her desire for closeness, directing Renee's affections while still playing the role of best friend. It was a level of psychological manipulation so deep it would ultimately lead to tragedy. On Monday, August 5th, 2013, Renee woke with a sense of anticipation. Braden was supposedly appearing in court, and she held on to hope that he might finally be released. The previous month had been agonizing. He'd been in isolation without phone privileges, and she had sent a flood of daily messages into the void, telling coworkers how difficult the silence was. That morning, the quiet finally broke. Braden started texting, but his tone was off. Curt, cold and distant. Around 1:00 p.m. Renee and a coworker, Joseph, were heading to a cafe for lunch when Renee's composure shattered. She burst into tears and trembled, her body shaking with intense sobs. She handed Joseph her phone. On the screen was a message from Braden, a digital knife to her heart. "I think I need a break, and so do you." This was the only message from that day that anyone besides the sender and recipient would ever see. The full content of the other 91 texts they exchanged that day remains hidden, known only to Camila Zan. Renee wept through her lunch break, with cafe staff offering her tissues. She told Joseph she wanted to go home. She left work early, saying she planned to call Goulburn Prison to try to speak with Braden. Phone records showed that at 2:44 p.m., she made a 90-second call to the prison. She didn't reach Braden. What she learned remains a mystery, but it likely confirmed the awful truth beginning to dawn on her, that something was deeply wrong. Upon arriving home, Teresa noticed she was deeply upset, but Renee brushed off her mother's concern. She retreated to her room, and the rapid exchange of messages continued. It was then that Braden sent Teresa the alarming message, warning that Renee was talking about suicide. When Teresa confronted her, Renee spoke the words that would forever haunt her mother. "Mom, you don't have to worry about him anymore. I finally saw his true nature. It's over." What had she discovered? Had she called the prison and learned there was no inmate named Braden Spotty? Did a final cruel text from Braden reveal the fraud? Or was she simply crushed by the collapse of a relationship she believed was real? The truth died with her. Making an effort to appear composed, Renee dressed and applied makeup, telling her mother she was meeting friends for dinner. It was the last time Teresa saw her alive. Renee left the house and drove not to a restaurant, but eastward toward the setting sun and the unforgiving cliffs of Watson's Bay. She arrived at the Gap around 5:20 p.m. From the cliff's edge, she sent her final messages. One to Camila, the person who had been both her closest friend and her tormentor. Another to her mother. And the last to Braden, the man who never existed. Then she hurled her phone off the cliff, a definitive severing of the digital ties that had bound her so tightly. Shortly after, she followed it into the void. In the agonizing days and weeks after Renee's disappearance, the Marsden family existed in a fog of grief and confusion. While police initially treated it as a tragic suicide, Teresa and Mark couldn't accept it. They launched their own investigation, desperate to understand what had driven their daughter to despair. Their focus fixed on one thing: Braden Spatty. Teresa sent him repeated texts begging for answers. "Where are you? I need to talk to you. I need answers now," she wrote on August 7th. "Answer me, please. You can't do this." There's only silence. The ghost had disappeared. Meanwhile, the police investigation was quietly following the same trail. They obtained phone records and began interviewing Renee's friends and family. A terrifying picture began to emerge. There was no record of a Braden Spotty at Goulburn Prison. No evidence he ever existed at all. All calls and texts from Braden's number came from a phone registered to one person only, Camila Zan. On August 25th, 2013, leading senior constable Georgina Robinson met with Camila. Camila provided a handwritten statement that mentioned Renee's final text to her, but made no mention of Braden. At the end of their meeting, the officer confronted her directly. "I want you to be honest with me," she said. "The phone records I have here suggest to me that you are Braden. Is that true?" Camila denied it. "No," she answered, her voice faltering. "I know a lot of people think I am. The whole world is against me. I want to be where Renee is now." But the evidence was irrefutable. On September 23rd, police executed a search at Camila's home, looking for the phone used to create the Braden identity. They came up empty-handed. Camila had already disposed of the phone and its SIM card, eliminating any chance of recovering the final message's content from the service provider's records, which had expired after a week. But the pressure was mounting. As the search concluded, another officer gently asked if Camila had anything she wanted to say. This time, the wall gave way, though only slightly. "I was the one texting Renee," she admitted. "Renee asked for it. She wanted me to pretend I was Braden." Pressed for a reason, Camila could only say, "I don't know. I just did it because she asked me to." It was a desperate, self-serving lie. She claimed it was a mutual arrangement, a way for them to conduct a secret same-sex relationship their families would disapprove of. But this story crumbled under the evidence authorities would painstakingly assemble. Much later, in 2019, technological advances enabled detectives to retrieve data from an old phone Renee had used, containing messages through June 2013. The texts were eye-opening. They showed a young woman deeply in love, frustrated by her boyfriend's possessiveness and his failure to share photos or videos of himself. They revealed a woman who believed without any doubt that Braden Spati existed. The cat, so to speak, was out of the bag. The deception was not a shared secret. It was a one-sided campaign of psychological manipulation. The coroner's inquest at Lidcombe was thick with silent sorrow in February 2020. For nearly 7 years, the Marsden family had fought for this moment. A public inquiry into Renee's death. They wanted the truth and accountability for the person responsible. The key witness was Camila Zan. Granted immunity from self-incrimination, she testified and stuck to her story that she and Renee had jointly created Braden. Under questioning, her tale fell apart. Deputy State Coroner Magistrate Elaine Truscott heard as the evidence painted a damning picture of jealousy and control. Text exchanges and Facebook interactions were presented, all clearly contradicting Camila's claim that Renee knew Braden wasn't real. The coroner found that Renee did not want to be in a relationship with Camila and preferred men. Camila, unable to accept this, became jealous, controlling, and toxic whenever Renee dated someone. The coroner's verdict, issued on May 20th, 2020, was a vindication for the Marsden family. Magistrate Truscott stated clearly that Renee died following the end of a relationship with a person whose existence was a fabrication by Camila Zan, designed to exert control and manipulation over her. The motive, she concluded, was for Camila to keep Renee exclusively to herself. She described the behavior as catfishing, but the vindication was mixed with sorrow. While the coroner condemned Camila's actions, she couldn't file charges. At that time, New South Wales lacked a specific crime for catfishing, when the intent wasn't financial gain or explicit threats. Camila's conduct, while morally reprehensible and directly causing Renee's death, occupied a legal gray area. She had destroyed the crucial evidence, the final day's messages, and without proof of harmful intent, matching existing criminal statutes, she couldn't be prosecuted. Camila Zan walked away unpunished. She lived nearby, frequented the same shops as the family whose life she had shattered. For Mark and Teresa Marsden, the fight persisted. "How is that fair?" Mark Marsden asked in a heartfelt, intense interview. They lost their daughter. They never recovered her body. Yet, the person responsible faced no consequences. The Renee Marsden case exposed a frightening gap in legislation and oversight for a modern form of psychological abuse. It's a story of love and grief, of a friendship twisted into a weapon of harm, and of a family's relentless pursuit of justice after an unimaginable deception. The sea at the gap holds Renee Marsden's body, but her story stands as a chilling warning about the ghosts that dwell in our devices and the catastrophic consequences of a lie that crossed every boundary. Story 3. In early March, Norfolk, Virginia typically experiences the first whispers of spring. Winter's lingering chill begins to fade, replaced by a hesitant warmth as daylight stretches longer, hinting at the summer to come. For Angelica A.J. Haddle, an 18-year-old first-year student at Longwood University, this time in 2015 meant one thing: spring break. It was a cherished tradition, a 7-day escape from the demanding pace of her dual degree in it and computer programming, a chance to trade textbooks and lecture halls for the familiar comfort of her parents' home. AJ wasn't just a dedicated student. She was a vibrant, spirited teenager, a talented athlete who had excelled in softball and field hockey, and a compassionate soul who devoted her time to community service. Her homecoming brought joy to her mother, Jennifer, and her younger siblings. The house on Tarara Road would once again echo with AJ's infectious laughter and the easy rhythm of family life. On the morning of Monday, March 2nd, 2015, her vacation day began like any other. Jennifer and her husband Wesley Haddle, AJ's adoptive stepfather, spoke with AJ around 7:00 a.m. before heading off to work. Shortly after, a neighbor spotted her briefly driving her car toward the family home. This was the last confirmed time she was seen alive. The day stretched before her, an open canvas of freedom before her studies resumed. She had plans, the casual, unstructured kind that fill a teenager's free time. She was halfway through a load of laundry, a mundane chore that reflected the ordinary rhythm of her day. Her favorite music played throughout the house from a wireless speaker, providing a soundtrack to her brief stay. When Jennifer returned from work that evening, a chill of dread settled over her. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. The music was still playing, a haunting sound in the sudden stillness. A pile of laundry sat partially folded, as if abandoned mid-task. AJ's purse and keys lay on the counter. Her car was parked outside, but AJ herself had vanished. A frantic search through the house yielded no answers, only a tightening coil of fear in Jennifer's chest. This was completely unlike AJ. She was reliable, always in touch. Her unexplained disappearance, leaving behind her essentials, rang every alarm bell. Hours crawled by, each minute amplifying the family's terror. Panic took hold. Jennifer's calls to AJ's cell went straight to voicemail. By nightfall, the family's anxious worry had crystallized into one horrifying certainty. Something was terribly wrong. They filed a missing persons report with the Norfolk Police Department. That call marked the beginning of their world falling apart. In the immediate aftermath of AJ's disappearance, one person became the public face of the family's anguish. Her stepfather, Wesley Hadel, stepped before cameras and reporters who quickly descended on their quiet neighborhood. He presented himself as a devastated but determined father, a man driven by purpose, channeling his grief into action. He organized search parties, leading dozens of volunteers through nearby parks and woods, calling out her name again and again. He gave emotional interviews to journalists, his face a portrait of anguish and urgency, pleading for his daughter's safe return. "We just want our baby back," he would say, his voice breaking with emotion. He appeared to be a man crumbling under a parent's worst nightmare, yet refusing to give in to despair. Wesley wasn't just a grieving father. He also positioned himself as an active investigator, willing to do whatever it took to bring AJ home. He told law enforcement and reporters that he believed his stepdaughter had been abducted, and he darkly suggested he had an idea who might be responsible. He began making accusations, directing suspicion toward one of AJ's acquaintances, a young man named Corey French, with whom she'd had a brief romance in middle school. Wesley painted French to authorities as obsessed, casting doubt on his character. He was crafting a narrative where he played the heroic father confronting an invisible threat, while positioning French as the possible villain in this unfolding tragedy. To neighbors desperate for answers, Wesley Hadel seemed like the only person moving the case forward, a lone champion fighting against the darkness that had swallowed his child. But beneath this carefully constructed image of the grieving parent, cracks began to show, revealing something far more sinister. Wesley's behavior, initially interpreted as desperate actions by a panicked father, started to seem erratic and strange to investigators. His obsessive focus on Corey French felt less like genuine suspicion and more like calculated misdirection. The first tangible evidence seemed to support his theory, but it raised more questions than answers. One of AJ's friends discovered a torn piece of her bank card on a roadside near French's house. It was a curious find, but what happened next dramatically shifted the investigation's focus. Wesley's attempts to frame Corey French escalated from subtle suggestions to overt actions. He told Andre Barr, another friend of AJ's, that he believed French had AJ's softball jacket and directed Barr to its possible location inside French's home. Barr subsequently told law enforcement he had seen the jacket at French's residence. When police executed a search warrant, they confirmed it was there. Briefly, it seemed Wesley's suspicions were justified. However, investigators were growing skeptical. How did Wesley know exactly where to find these crucial items? Under questioning, Wesley admitted to having illegally entered Corey French's home himself. He claimed he was searching for AJ or any sign of her whereabouts and had found the jacket hidden behind a couch. He justified his trespass by saying he feared police might not act quickly enough, and admitted he hadn't reported his discovery because he was afraid of facing breaking and entering charges. This confession marked a turning point. Rather than implicating French, Wesley had incriminated himself. The break-in and planting of the jacket were a panicked, clumsy attempt at deception that backfired spectacularly. Authorities began viewing him not as an ally, but as a key person of interest. They examined his motives more closely. Why was he so intent on framing a young man? What secret was he trying to hide? Every piece of evidence uncovered since AJ's disappearance, the debit card, the jacket, could be traced back to Wesley Hadel. The facade of the devoted, grieving father began to crumble, revealing a far more sinister truth beneath. The man who had been the most visible figure in the search for AJ was now the focus of the investigation into her disappearance. With suspicion now firmly on Wesley, detectives began digging into his background. What they found was disturbing. The 40-year-old had a history with the law at Ottawa. He had an extensive and serious criminal record, including prior convictions for bank robbery, breaking and entering, and burglary, along with known gang affiliations. This was not the man the public had seen on television. Moreover, his domestic situation was far from the stable image he projected. Shortly before AJ went missing, her mother, Jennifer, had discovered the extent of Wesley's drug addiction and had kicked him out of their family home. He had been living in a cheap motel nearby, his life unraveling. This new context cast his actions in a chilling new light. His television appearances now seemed like a calculated performance of deception. His efforts to implicate Corey French looked like a desperate ploy to deflect attention from himself. On March 21st, just weeks after AJ disappeared, Wesley Hadel was arrested, though not yet for her murder. The charges included obstruction of justice, breaking and entering, and illegal possession of ammunition by a convicted felon, all related to his unlawful entry into Corey French's home. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community that had supported him. The man who had organized search efforts and made emotional pleas for help was now behind bars, his credibility shattered. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. It wasn't found in a suspect's home or through a witness's statement, but through the silent digital traces Wesley had unknowingly left behind. Investigators obtained his cell phone records, which revealed a chilling timeline. On March 2nd, the day AJ went missing, and into the early hours of March 3rd, cell tower data showed his phone and AJ's were pinging from the same towers, moving together in tandem away from Norfolk. This directly contradicted his statements about his whereabouts and suggested he was with AJ, or at least in possession of her phone, during the critical hours after she vanished. But the conclusive evidence came from technology he had installed in his own work van, a GPS device. Police obtained a warrant for its data, which provided a precise, undeniable record of his movements in the days following AJ's disappearance. The GPS history showed his van visiting several locations, most of which he could account for. But one trip stood out. On March 4th, 2 days after AJ was last seen, the GPS tracked his van to a remote, desolate location in Southampton County, roughly 50 miles from Norfolk, near the North Carolina border. The van had stopped at an abandoned, run-down house, far from any known work sites or acquaintances. There was no legitimate reason for him to be there. For investigators, it was a stark moment of grim realization. They knew where to look next. On April 9th, 2015, more than a month after AJ Hadel disappeared from her home, a team of investigators arrived at the abandoned property identified by the GPS data. The air was thick with foreboding as they began searching the neglected and decaying grounds. In the backyard, near a collapsing shed, Officer Benjamin noticed a large, weathered sheet of plywood resting on the earth. It looked out of place. He moved it aside, and what lay beneath confirmed their worst fears. Partially hidden in a shallow drainage ditch was the body of a young woman. The next day, the remains were officially confirmed to be Angelica A.J. Hadel. With that, the frantic search ended, and the murder investigation began. The scene was horrific. A.J. was found face down, with her pants pulled down to her ankles, a detail that strongly suggested sexual assault, though the condition of her remains made definitive confirmation difficult. The subsequent autopsy revealed a cause of death that was both shocking and deeply disturbing. Acute drug overdose. The forensic pathologist determined she had approximately 3 times the lethal dose of heroin in her system, a finding that deeply puzzled her family and friends. I.J. had no history of drug use, no needle marks on her arms, no indication she had ever experimented with drugs. The substance had been introduced into her system, but not by her own hand. The examiner also noted bruising on her neck and chest, along with black eyes, injuries consistent with a violent struggle and being restrained. The official ruling for her death was homicide, with the medical examiner unable to rule out suffocation or strangulation, in addition to the heroin overdose. Following the discovery of A.J.'s body and the shocking manner of death, the circumstantial evidence against Wesley Hadel began to form an ironclad chain. Authorities executed a search warrant on his work van and his motel room. Inside the van, they found a shovel, latex gloves, and rolls of duct tape, an ominous collection that could facilitate an abduction. They also discovered a hair tie and a photograph of A.J., but notably absent were photos of Jennifer's other 3 daughters, suggesting a specific and disturbing fixation on his oldest stepdaughter. The search of his motel room yielded even more incriminating findings. Hidden above the ceiling tiles, officers found a stash of drugs. They also found more duct tape and ammunition, connecting him directly to the tools of harm and the very drug that caused A.J.'s death. His drug supplier later admitted to selling him the substances shortly after A.J. vanished. Investigators now had a clear and terrible theory of the crime. They believed that Wesley went to the family home on March 2nd, while A.J. was alone. He likely forced her to write an odd, rambling note that was later found, a message designed to make it look like she'd left voluntarily. He then abducted her, removing her from the house so hastily that her laundry remained unfolded and her music kept playing. He held her captive for at least 1 day. Prosecutors believe she wasn't killed until March 3rd. At some point during this horrifying ordeal, they believe he violently subdued her, and then, in an act of unfathomable cruelty, injected a lethal dose of drugs into her system. He then used her cell phone to send misleading texts to her family to create confusion and delay the investigation. Finally, on March 4th, guided by the precise data from his van's GPS, he transported her body to the remote Southampton County location and buried her in a shallow grave, hoping his terrible crime would remain hidden forever. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the legal process moved agonizingly slowly. Wesley Hadel was not formally charged with A.J.'s murder until November 2018, over 3.5 years after her body was found. The grand jury indicted him on 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of felony murder, and 1 count of felony concealment of a dead body. His first trial, beginning in early 2020, ended abruptly after just 2 days when the judge declared a mistrial due to a legal dispute over what evidence could be presented to the jury. For A.J.'s family, it was another excruciating setback, another delay of justice. Finally, in January 2022, nearly 7 years after A.J.'s death, Wesley Hadel stood trial again. The prosecution methodically laid out their case, showing the jury the damning web of evidence they had assembled. They presented the GPS data, the digital breadcrumbs that led them to A.J.'s burial site, and showed cell phone records proving he and A.J. were together after her disappearance. They detailed his bizarre and deceptive behavior, his deliberate attempts to frame an innocent young man, and his history of drug addiction and criminal activity. The prosecution argued that Wesley abducted AJ with the intent to assault her, and that when she resisted, he killed her in the most brutal way imaginable by poisoning her with heroin. The defense offered an alternative narrative. They claimed AJ was depressed and had taken her own life using pain medication. They tried to paint Wesley as a victim of circumstance, a man wrongly accused, but the evidence was simply too strong. The jury listened intently as Jennifer, AJ's mother, took the stand, her voice heavy with 7 years of grief as she testified against the man who had been her husband, the man who had legally become her daughter's father, only to end her life. After careful deliberation, the jury reached their verdict: guilty. Wesley Paul Haddell was convicted of first-degree murder and concealing a dead body, receiving a life sentence plus 15 additional years for the concealment charge. From the moment of his arrest until his sentencing, Wesley Haddell consistently maintained his innocence. As he was led away to begin his life behind bars, he continued to cling to the lie he had crafted from the beginning. The tragedy of A.J. Haddell is the ultimate betrayal, a story of a predator disguised as protector, a hunter who operated in plain sight, manipulating a family's trust and love to commit an unspeakable crime. Angelica Haddell came home for spring break, expecting safety and comfort from her family, but instead became prey to the one person who should have protected her. Her bright and promising future was brutally cut short by calculated evil. While the conviction brought her family some measure of justice, it could never fill the immense void left by AJ's loss. Though the music in her room has long since fallen silent, the memory of her vibrant spirit, and the terrifying story of her final days, stands as a stark reminder of the evil that can hide behind a trusted face. Story 4. On June 23, 2018, the fading light of late afternoon stretched long shadows across the peaceful town of Westminster, Massachusetts. It was a summer Saturday that seemed heavy with possibility, a day overflowing with the carefree freedom of young adulthood. For Brandon Chickless, age 20, it appeared to be an ordinary day, outlined by simple plans. A former Eagle Scout who loved the outdoors and had a clear future ahead. Pursuing a career as an HVAC technician, Brandon was known for his kindness, his reliability, and the steady smile that rarely left his face. He was the kind of person who made his family proud, a devoted son and a loyal friend. That day, he told his family he was leaving to visit relatives in Windham, New Hampshire. It was a short trip, a route he knew well. There was no reason for concern, no hint of the tragedy that was silently forming nearby. His gray Honda Civic pulled away from the street, a final fleeting glimpse of normalcy before everything was forever shattered. Brandon never reached Windham. By the next day, worry began seeping into the Chickless household. Brandon hadn't shown up. His phone went unanswered. For a family accustomed to his consistent behavior, this was more than unusual. It was alarming. They filed a missing person report, an official acknowledgement of the fear rapidly taking root inside them. Police began their investigation, a methodical process that seemed unbearably slow to those waiting. Days turned into a week. The search for Brandon uncovered its first grim clue on June 29th, not in New Hampshire, but roughly 40 miles west in a mall parking lot. There sat his gray Honda, empty and silent, a stark reminder of an interrupted journey. But there was still no sign of Brandon. The investigation into his disappearance now had a focal point, but no direction. Where had he gone after leaving his car? Had he met someone? His cell phone data provided crucial insights. It traced an electronic trail of his last recorded movements, and the final signal pointed not to Windham, but to a specific location in the nearby town of Ashburnham, 171 Packard Hill Road. This was a large estate owned by the family of a young woman named Julia Enright. Julia, then 21st, had been a former classmate of Brandon's at Montecouset Regional Vocational Technical School. They had known each other for years, and had even been in a brief relationship. According to Brandon's family, when detectives contacted her, she was cooperative, but her story seemed thin and inconsistent. She admitted she had arranged to meet Brandon that day and said he had come to visit her. They had drunk alcohol together for a while before he reportedly left to buy drugs and simply never came back. She denied having been in his car with him or spending time in the peculiar, almost fantastical structure on her family's property, a large, equipped treehouse. But the estate held secrets that Julia's statements tried to conceal. As officers searched the area, their attention turned to the treehouse. From the outside, it might have looked like a simple retreat, a childhood fantasy built among the branches. But inside, a more sinister scene began to unfold. Court documents would later describe it as equipped with an array of restraints. There was an unsettling aura of preparation and purpose. Though it was clear the space had been recently and thoroughly cleaned, with new carpeting installed over the floorboards, reality couldn't be completely erased. When the new carpet was pulled up, the planks beneath told a story of violence. It appeared blood had seeped through the cracks. Forensic specialists were called in, and their tools uncovered what the naked eye couldn't see. They found traces of Brandon Chiklis's blood on the steps leading up to the treehouse, inside it and beneath it, and more traces were found in Julia Enright's car. The physical evidence directly contradicted her version of events. The web of lies she had begun to weave was already unraveling at its seams. The search for Brandon Chiklis as a missing person ended grimly on July 10th, nearly 3 weeks after he left his home, when a jogger along a rural stretch of Route 119 in Rindge, New Hampshire, just 6 miles from where Brandon's car had been abandoned, stumbled upon something horrible. Lying by the roadside, wrapped up and discarded, were human remains, severely decomposed from time and summer heat, but soon confirmed through identification. It was Brandon's body. New Hampshire authorities formally ruled his death a homicide. Now investigators had a victim, evidence, location, and a prime suspect. By late July, Julia Enright was arrested, accused of killing her former peer. She pleaded not guilty and was held without the possibility of bail while the local community struggled to comprehend the atrocity that had occurred amid apparent tranquility. The trial began on a cold November Monday in the year 2021. Worcester Superior Court was poised to reveal the details of a crime equally strange and savage. From the outset, the jury faced two sharply contrasting narratives. Under the direction of Assistant District Attorney Terry McLaughlin, the prosecution portrayed a calculated, premeditated murder carried out by a young woman harboring a dark and disturbing psyche. Her defense attorney, Louis Badway, countered with a startling claim. Julia Enright had indeed taken Brandon Chiklis's life, but she had acted in urgent self-defense following a brutal assault by him. The prosecution systematically dismantled Julia's original alibi, arguing that she had cunningly lured Brandon to meet her at the treehouse, spinning a tale of mystery to draw him to his death. Text exchanges retrieved from their phones emerged as pivotal evidence. In these messages, Julia told Brandon she had a surprise waiting for him and critically instructed him to keep his destination secret. On the same day, she would later claim he assaulted her. She was also texting her boyfriend, Jonathan Lind, hinting at her own surprise for him. "I might have something for you," she wrote, adding she couldn't discuss it via text. Prosecutors argued that her behavior after the killing reflected not a traumatized victim, but a detached and scheming murderer trying to cover her tracks. That evening, she and Lind at a sushi restaurant, masking the day's gruesome events with an appearance of normalcy. Hours after fatally stabbing Brandon and allegedly helping Lind wrap his body in a tarp, she sent a text to Brandon's phone. "Why didn't you come meet me?" This was portrayed as a cynical, self-serving attempt to create an alibi, a digital false trail designed to mislead investigators. The defense didn't dispute these facts. Badway acknowledged the young couple had tried to hide what happened, portraying their decision as driven by terror and confusion, rather than malicious intent. But it was the examination of Julia Enright's private life that deeply unsettled the court and public observers. The prosecution maintained that to understand the murder, jurors needed insight into the killer. Julia wasn't just a phlebotomist working at Quest Diagnostics. She also maintained a secret career as a professional dominatrix. A sideline, prosecutors argued, was connected to her dark obsessions. They presented evidence of what they called her disturbing fixations, an intense and lasting interest in animal bones, blood, knives, and visceral horror. A search of her home uncovered what resembled a chamber of horrors. Containers of blood, an assortment of used condoms, and most disturbingly, dead animals left to decompose in enclosures so she could later collect their skeletons for artistic purposes. Judge Daniel Wren made careful rulings about which macabre exhibits the jury could see. He authorized photos of her knives, dominatrix equipment, and a plastic bin containing animal remains in various stages of decomposition. He also permitted jurors to hear portions of Julia's police interview where she described her intimate activities with Lind, involving knife play and mutual cutting. Some evidence was excluded as overly prejudicial. The jury was spared photos of a bucket of organs or footage of Julia tasting blood from a body part. Still, what they witnessed and heard was sufficiently damning. Prosecutors further claimed Julia had tried to bribe a Planned Parenthood clinic to keep the fetus from an abortion she had undergone, so she could, as stated in her own words, play with its bones. Arguably, the most alarming evidence came from Julia's personal journal, where an entry seemed to cut through conflicting narratives and expose a chilling motive. The prosecutor read the sentence in the hushed courtroom, each word landing with forceful impact. "I just have an insatiable curiosity to kill a person." Faced with this accumulation of disturbing evidence, the defense strategy relied entirely on having Julia Enright testify personally to tell her side of the story. This was a high-stakes gamble. In an unusual move, Judge Wren prohibited video cameras during her testimony, heightening the moment's gravity and intimacy. Julia Enright, the young woman who collected decomposing carcasses and documented a desire to kill, presented a different persona to the jury. She appeared emotional, frequently crying as she recounted her version of June 23rd, 2018. Her attorney began by showing a photo of her as a 21-year-old phlebotomist on the day of the killing. She confirmed she had invited Brandon to the treehouse, but denied murderous intent. Louis Badway was direct, describing Brandon Chickless as an attacker, and arguing that while Julia may have initially invited him for consensual interaction, she later withdrew consent. When she resisted his advances, he claimed Brandon turned violent and assaulted her. "I kept screaming for him to stop," Julia testified, her voice thick with emotion. "At that point, I pulled the knife from my belt." She always carried a knife, a fact the prosecution portrayed as premeditation, while the defense characterized it as simply routine. "I swung my arm and stabbed him," she continued. She described the stabbing as panicked, almost blind. "At first he seemed fine. He looked okay. I think I got his neck at the very end." She said that after stabbing him, she fled the treehouse in fear and didn't return for 40 minutes. When she came back, she found Brandon dead. It was then, she said, that she frantically called her boyfriend, Jonathan Lind, and he helped her conceal the body. Her testimony was visceral and gripping, a portrait of victimization. But under the prosecutor's cross-examination, this carefully crafted image began to crack. The prosecutor confronted her with her own words and her personal history. She faced questions about her work as a dominatrix, her habit of grave robbing to collect human bones, and the animal organs she stored. Julia tried to downplay these pursuits, attributing them to a teenage fascination with the provocative musician Marilyn Manson, a phase she'd outgrown. But then the journal entry was introduced. When confronted with the line, I just have an insatiable curiosity to kill a person." Her composure shattered. The two versions of Julia Enright, the tearful, frightened witness on the stand and the cold, curious writer of those chilling words, could not be reconciled. The jury heard 10 days of evidence. They saw forensic proof of a blood-stained cleanup, listened to text messages suggesting a hidden surprise, and examined the unsettling artifacts from Julia's life. They heard her emotional claim of self-defense and sensed the cold, detached curiosity in her written words. On November 15th, 2021, after deliberations, they announced their verdict. Julia Enright was found guilty. Not of first-degree murder, which would have required proof of deliberate planning, but of second-degree murder. The verdict suggested they didn't fully accept the prosecution's narrative of premeditated killing, but firmly rejected her claim that she acted in self-defense. On March 3rd, 2022, Julia Enright appeared in court again for sentencing. The anguish of the Chiklis family was palpable in the courtroom. Today's sentencing doesn't erase the pain endured by the Chiklis family after their loss, but we hope it brings some justice for this young man and his loved ones, said Worcester County District Attorney Joseph D. Early Jr. in a statement. Brandon's family and friends expressed their gratitude to the law enforcement and legal teams involved in the case. "We are thankful for the dedication and effort by everyone who helped pursue justice for Brandon," they said. Superior Court Judge Daniel Wren sentenced Julia Enright, then 25 years old, to life in prison. She could apply for parole after serving 25 years. The story didn't end with Julia's conviction. The aftermath of her crime continued, especially affecting her boyfriend, Jonathan Lind. He had been a shadowy figure during her trial, his name mentioned by both sides. Julia had testified that he helped her dispose of Brandon's body. However, he hadn't been charged at that time. After her conviction, though, legal focus shifted to him. He was accused of being an accessory to murder after the fact, and of perjury for allegedly giving false testimony to the grand jury during the early investigation. Lynn's own legal proceedings proved complex and problematic. Julia Enright, now a convicted murderer serving a life sentence, invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to testify at his trial. This created a difficult legal challenge for prosecutors, as her testimony was crucial to their case against him. Additionally, due to a procedural error, prosecutors were barred from using Lynn's own 2018 grand jury testimony to support the perjury charge. This meant that for the accessory charge, prosecutors essentially had to re-establish the entire murder case from scratch, proving not only that Lind was an accessory, but also that a murder had occurred, all without referencing Julia's conviction. Details revealed during pretrial hearings for Lind in August 2024 exposed more disturbing information. Troubling text messages exchanged between Lind and Enright shortly before Brandon's murder were described by Judge Wren, who also presided over Lind's case. Though not quoted directly in court, the proceedings were sealed from public access. Prosecutors argued they demonstrated shared violent tendencies between them both. One message reportedly referenced approvingly targeting schools during mass shootings. The couple's disturbing mindset before the crime unfolded further complicated this grim story, set against the peaceful New England backdrop, where such brutality occurred within its borders. This case, now known as the Treehouse Killer case, remains a haunting example studied widely among criminologists today. A stark illustration of how an ordinary young woman's life concealed the extraordinary shadows of her private world. This story recounts how a kind, loving young man was lured to his death by a former classmate, his body abandoned by the roadside as his killer dined on sushi. At the heart of this tale lies the enigmatic figure of Julia Enright herself, a woman who wept in court claiming to be a victim, yet whose own words revealed a cold, insatiable, and ultimately lethal curiosity. The quiet woods of Ashburnham now carry a somber legacy, and the treehouse, perhaps once a place of childhood dreams, stands as a mute witness to a twisted web of lies and a life brutally cut far too short. Story 5. At the dawn of an Australian spring, Melbourne thrums with vibrant, almost rebellious energy. The jacaranda trees paint the sidewalks purple, and the air, cleansed by the last winter rains, carries the scent of coffee and blooming jasmine. This is a city that pulses with the energy of countless stories. A metropolis of laneway murals, sprawling parks, and neighborhoods each with their own distinct character. In Brunswick, an inner-city suburb famous for its artistic edge and creative spirit, the streets form an ever-changing gallery of street art, vintage shops, and coffee houses where local gossip is exchanged over expertly crafted flat whites. It was in this setting, within this rich tapestry of urban life, that 19-year-old Isla Bell was beginning to weave the first threads of her own story. Isla stood on the threshold of her future. With a spirit as bright and hopeful as the city she inhabited, she radiated a warmth that naturally drew people to her. Those who knew her described her as lovely, not just in the superficial way of youth, but in a deeper sense, a grace that came from inner authenticity and courage. She loved animals, her compassion extending to the quiet, faithful connections with creatures great and small. Her dream, a cherished goal she held close, was to study marine biology, dedicating her life to exploring the mysterious, sunlit world beneath the waves. She was a daughter to her parents, a friend to her peers, a person whose presence brightened the lives of those who loved her. But in the spring of 2024, as the city bloomed around her, a shadow was descending over Isla's path, a darkness destined to extinguish her light forever. Like many young people navigating the unstable terrain between adolescence and adulthood, Isla's life had its share of complexities. She was finding her place in the world, a journey that sometimes led her down uncertain paths. On the night of Friday, October 4th, Isla left her Brunswick home, the familiar sights and sounds of her neighborhood wrapping around her like a comfortable embrace. Her last confirmed sighting was around 6:00 p.m. As she ventured into the dusk, a young woman full of the eager energy of a future still unfolding. She was heading toward what she believed would be an exciting new chapter. She was moving toward a man who would prove to be the cruel final punctuation to her brief life. His name was Marat Ganev, a 53-year-old man living in St. Kilda East, an area known for its faded coastal charm and its grittier, more transient underbelly. Ganev was more than twice Isla's age, a man whose life stood in stark contrast to her youthful dreams. He struggled with personal demons and an opioid addiction that required daily methadone treatment to manage. Isla seemed to have only a passing acquaintance with him. Their connection was tenuous, a thin thread in the vast interconnected web of the city. But it was this thread that would pull her into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. On Saturday, October 5th, Isla arrived at Ganev's St. Kilda East apartment. The building, like many in the area, had a CCTV system, a steady, watchful lens monitoring the entrance and windows, recording the movements of residents with an indifferent digital gaze. The system captured Isla's arrival, a fleeting glimpse of a young woman crossing the threshold, unknowingly stepping out of the world of the living. She would never be recorded leaving that apartment again. For a brief, shimmering moment, it seemed Isla had found what she was looking for. Around midnight on October 7th, she sent a Snapchat message to a friend. Her text, an excited, unsuspecting declaration of good fortune, said she'd met a perfect Russian sugar daddy who'd rescued her from danger and showered her with gifts. The message reflected youthful naivety, her desire for security and care, twisted into a dangerous illusion. It was the last time anyone heard from her. Her phone went silent. Her social media profiles went dark. Her bank cards remained untouched. It was as if Isla Bell had simply vanished from existence. But she hadn't disappeared. She was still in that St. Kilda East apartment, where the illusion of generous protection had curdled into horrifying reality. In the early hours of that same morning, the relentless CCTV lens, peering through gaps in Ganyev's kitchen window, recorded Isla Bell's final moments. The footage, grainy, partially obscured, showed what authorities would later describe as an altercation. Investigators noted what appeared to be Isla's head jerking as if being struck. A brief, violent scene, a silent film of life being violently ended. Police believe that in that moment, within his dark kitchen, Marat Ganyev beat Isla Bell to death. The period following the alleged killing was marked not by panic or remorse, but by a calculated, systematic attempt to erase all evidence of a crime. Over the next 48 hours, surveillance footage showed Ganyev undertaking what authorities would later call a thorough cleaning of his residence. He was, according to police, working to scrub away the proof of his terrible deed, laboring to remove the invisible stains of violence. But a person's life cannot be so easily erased. Isla's body remained, a silent, undeniable witness to what had happened in that cramped apartment. A plan was needed, a grim and desperate scheme to dispose of the evidence. And for that, Ganyev needed an accomplice. His partner in crime, as alleged by police, was Io Yaffe, a 57-year-old man living in Hampton in the Bayside area. On the day after the alleged murder, phone records show a flurry of communication between the two men. Yaffe, who had been on an overnight trip to Warburton, a town in the Yarra Ranges, abruptly cut his journey short just hours after his phone conversation with Ganyev. He was returning to the city, summoned by a call to participate in a grim and urgent cover-up operation. Days later, on either October 9th or 17th, reports vary, the two men were allegedly captured on CCTV once more. This time, they were seen removing a refrigerator from Ganyev's apartment. The appliance, a black unit, was wrapped in clear plastic and dark tape, serving as a makeshift coffin for the young woman hidden inside. They loaded it onto a trailer and drove off, beginning a bizarre and disturbing journey through Melbourne's southern suburbs. For nearly a week, from October 17th to the 22nd, the refrigerator sat abandoned on a street in Caulfield South, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of family homes and well-kept yards. It was an odd and an out-of-place sight, a discarded appliance left to the elements. But this was no ordinary piece of junk. As spring temperatures climbed, the fridge began emitting a repulsive smell. It attracted swarms of flies, a persistent, buzzing cloud that signaled the dreadful secret contained within. A concerned local resident, disturbed by both the odor and the sight, called police. This was the first of several close calls, when truth nearly came to light, but was narrowly avoided once again. Before officers could investigate, the refrigerator was moved. Police claim that Yaffe transported it first to an address in Bentley East, and then days later via moving truck to Mulgrave. The journey continued, a grim parade through Melbourne's suburban streets. The fridge and its horrific cargo moved from one temporary hiding spot to another, perpetually evading discovery by the narrowest of margins. While this dreadful saga was unfolding, Isla's family was enduring an entirely different kind of torment. Their daughter, sister, friend had disappeared. Her 20th birthday, on October 22nd, came and went, a day meant for celebration, marked instead by a mother's anguished, desperate plea on social media for her child's safe return. "My heart is breaking," she posted. Her message, a lament that echoed across Melbourne. Friends organized fundraising efforts, using proceeds to print flyers and raise public awareness. Their actions reflected deep love for Isla and a determination not to let her memory fade. The end of the refrigerator's travels and the beginning of resolution in Isla's disappearance came on November 18th. A Bentley resident, encountering the abandoned appliance, decided to inspect it. He removed the plastic wrapping encasing it. As he did so, the fridge door swung open suddenly, and a bag fell out. Assuming it contained animal remains, he made a choice that inadvertently preserved crucial evidence. He moved the fridge to a street corner near bulk rubbish collection and placed the bag containing Isla's remains into a household trash bin. Later that same day, growing unease led him to contact police. This tip provided the critical breakthrough for detectives from the Missing Persons Unit, who had officially taken over the investigation in late October. Their search now gained sharp focus. They tracked the path taken by the residential bin, following leads that directed them on Tuesday evening, November 19th, to a vast waste management site in Dandenong, located in Melbourne's industrial southeast. There, amid mountains of the city's discarded refuse, their search reached its sorrowful, devastating end. They found what they believed were human remains belonging to Isla Bell. This discovery turned the missing persons file into a homicide investigation. That same day, investigators executed search warrants at 2 addresses in Bentley East and Mulgrave, the last stops for the wandering fridge. They took 3 men into custody. Marat Ganiev, whom Isla had met expecting what she thought would be an exciting adventure, faced murder charges. Eyal Yaffa, accused of helping transport her body in that makeshift casket, was charged with accessory offenses and obstruction of justice. A third man, aged 63, from Mulgrave, was released pending further investigation. Ganyev's first court appearance in Melbourne was brief. He sat hunched in the dock, his appearance showing clear distress as his attorney informed the judge he had missed his methadone treatment for 48 hours. He was ordered to remain in custody. During this subsequent police interview, he allegedly admitted to moving Isla's body, but denied any involvement in attacking her or causing her death. He claimed he didn't know how she died. Yaffe also faced court proceedings, with his lawyer arguing for his release on bail. Authorities alleged he had assisted Ganiev in concealing the murder for several weeks, maintained regular contact with him after the incident, and was captured on surveillance video, helping remove the refrigerator from the residence. Despite the seriousness of the charges, Yaffe was granted bail with strict conditions, a decision that sparked widespread shock. The committal hearing, designed to determine whether there was sufficient evidence for a jury trial, began in October 25. Isla's family members were present in the courtroom, their faces etched with profound and fresh grief as they had to endure the stark and harrowing details of her death. Dr. Hans Duflu, the forensic pathologist, testified and explained how Isla's remains were found severely decomposed. He noted the body's condition was too deteriorated to establish a precise cause of death. There were multiple cuts, minor wounds, and fractures to her skull and ribs, but it couldn't be determined whether these occurred before or after she died. Under cross-examination, Dr. Duflu acknowledged that some injuries might have resulted from compression by garbage truck machinery. A toxicology examination also detected several substances in Isla's system at the time of her death. The testimony painted a sorrowful catalog of horrors so upsetting that one of Isla's friends fled the courtroom in tears. Despite uncertainty about the exact cause of death, the prosecution argued that the weight of evidence pointed to Ganiev. They presented CCTV footage of the alleged attack, evidence of thorough cleaning, and the fridge's removal. They also provided phone records linking Ganiev and Yaffe in the aftermath of the killing. Ganyev's defense team noted their client struggled with substance abuse and mental health issues, hinting at a possible guilty plea to manslaughter rather than murder. However, on October 31st, 2025, Magistrate Michel Mikitsi ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, leaving it for a jury to determine the guilt of both men. Following this decision, both Marat Ganiev and Eyal Yaffe formally entered pleas of not guilty. News of Isla's death and the grim efforts to conceal it spread grief and outrage throughout Melbourne and beyond. Her story became a rallying point in the fight against violence toward women. Her family, engulfed in their own indescribable anguish, managed to speak publicly about their feelings. The trial for Marat Ganev and Ya Yaffe has not yet begun. The complete story of what happened in that St. Kilda East apartment in the early morning hours of October 7, 2024, remains obscured by the accused's lies and secrecy. For Isla Belle's family, the quest for justice is a long and difficult road, but their love for Isla and their determination to honor her life burns as an enduring flame that will not be extinguished. It stands as a bright beacon of hope against an overwhelming darkness, a promise that Isla Belle, who cherished dreams of the sea, will never be forgotten. Story 6. In the peaceful seaside community of Long Beach, New York, where the Atlantic's tides whispered promises of new beginnings along the shore, Teresa Keel built a life rooted in dedication and quiet strength. Born in 1962, she was raised in the tight-knit neighborhoods of Long Island. Her early years were shaped by the simple rhythms of family life and schooling. She pursued a career in education, a calling that matched her patient nature and sharp intellect, rising to the position of principal at a school in the Malvern Union Free School District. There, she was known as a pillar of unwavering support, the kind of educator who stayed late to help struggling students or organized community events with meticulous attention to detail. Her days were filled with lesson planning, parent meetings, and the cheerful sounds of children echoing through the halls, a routine that gave her fulfillment amid the complexities of being a single parent. Teresa's home at 5 New York Avenue was a modest apartment in a multi-family building. Its entrance, a narrow corridor flanked by aged brick walls and a single overhead light that cast long shadows even in daylight. It was her sanctuary, decorated with framed photos of family gatherings and shelves of books on education and child development. By 2016, at 54 years old, Teresa had managed the challenges of raising her daughter, Francesca, largely alone following her divorce. Francesca, born in 1997, had always been a spirited child, bright but prone to mood swings that Teresa attributed to the turbulence of adolescence. As Francesca reached her early 20s, their relationship grew strained under the weight of conflicting expectations. Teresa envisioned a stable future for her child, perhaps college, a reliable career. But Francesca's path leaned toward independence, marked by a series of temporary jobs and a passion for business ideas that often fizzled out. It was within this delicate dynamic that Ralph Kepler entered their lives. At 27, Kepler was an imposing figure, over 6 feet tall with a physique honed from years of manual labor and a demeanor that could shift from engaging to intense in an instant. A native of Lindenhurst, a neighboring town just miles from the shore, he had found work as a corrections officer at Rikers Island, the massive detention facility in New York City, where he enforced rules in an environment of constant tension. The job demanded vigilance and authority, traits Kepler possessed in abundance, but it also immersed him in the undercurrents of frustration and resentment that brewed among inmates and staff alike. Kepler's background was unremarkable. High school graduate, no college education, a string of short-lived relationships. But he carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, often talking about grand plans that rarely materialized. Kepler and Francesca met in late 2015. Their relationship ignited during a neighborhood gathering where Francesca's outgoing personality captivated him. What began as casual dating soon escalated into a passionate romance. Francesca, yearning for escape from her mother's watchful eye, found in Kepler a partner who mirrored her spontaneous energy. They shared visions of financial freedom, talking late into the night about launching a business that could change their lives. By early 2016, the couple had moved in together in a small rental on Spencer Avenue in Lindenhurst, a cozy place with a messy living room crowded with unfinished projects and takeout containers. Their relationship was intense, characterized by lavish gestures and fierce arguments, but to outsiders it seemed like an ordinary young couple finding their way through adulthood. Teresa, however, saw warning signs from the start. She objected to Kepler's influence on Francesca, viewing him as unreliable and overly controlling. In private conversations with friends, she described him as unstable and manipulative, a harsh assessment stemming from incidents where his temper flared. Once, during a trivial argument about evening plans, he reduced Francesca to tears. Teresa's concerns went beyond personality. She worried about the couple's financial dealings. In the spring of 2016, Francesca and Kepler pitched an investment opportunity to Teresa, a social media app aimed at college students, promising quick returns in the booming tech sector. Teresa, always the supportive parent, agreed to invest a modest amount from her savings, viewing it as a way to encourage Francesca's ambitions. A relative also participated, pooling resources to fund the app's development. But the project stalled almost immediately. Programming glitches, marketing challenges, and the money disappeared into a void of excuses and delays. Tensions mounted when the investment failed. Kepler, who had also invested his own money, became resentful, blaming Teresa and the relative for mishandling the venture. In June 2016, he filed a lawsuit against them in Nassau County Supreme Court, demanding reimbursement and alleging fraud. The court documents arrived like a storm, outlining claims of broken contracts and wasted potential. Teresa, stunned by the betrayal, defended herself aggressively, seeking counsel from her attorney, Thomas Leotti, who advised her to stand firm. Later, court records would reveal the depth of Kepler's bitterness. In private text conversations with Francesca, he referred to Teresa as a monster who deserved to die. These messages painted a picture of escalating animosity. Francesca, caught between loyalty to her mother and commitment to Kepler, initially stood by him but gradually reduced her visits to Teresa's home. As summer turned to fall, the rift deepened. Francesca obtained a restraining order against her mother, claiming emotional distress caused by the legal battles and family conflicts. The paperwork, filed with the local court, gave Francesca distance but also planted seeds of isolation. Privately, the couple's frustration intensified. Kepler, burdened by mounting debts from the failed app and his stressful job at Rikers, viewed the lost money as a personal affront. His conversations with Francesca grew darker, with hints of conflict escalating into something more menacing. Unknown to Teresa, Francesca purchased a GPS tracker online in October 2016. A small black device, roughly the size of a matchbox. She attached it beneath her mother's silver sedan, parked near the Long Beach apartment. The unit synced to an app on Francesca's phone, alerting her each time Teresa's car moved, from home to work, from work to the grocery store, the predictable routes of a school principal's life. Meanwhile, Kepler made preparations in secret. He acquired a metal barbell, a heavy weight from a nearby gym, its cold steel surface gleaming under dim light. Approximately 45 pounds, it looked like innocent exercise equipment until its purpose changed. He hid it in his car's trunk, telling Francesca it was for self-defense, though her worried glances suggested she understood otherwise. Their plan took shape during late-night conversations, fueled by resentment and a twisted sense of justice. "She ruined us," Kepler would murmur, his voice low and determined. Francesca, conflicted but complicit, nodded in silent agreement. They tracked Teresa's routines with precision. Her after-dinner evening walks, her solitary entry into the building around 10 p.m., the hallway's isolation from prying eyes. December 4th, 2016, began cold and overcast, Long Beach's air sharp with winter's approach. Teresa spent her day at school, overseeing holiday preparations, decorating the entrance with student artwork, and organizing a seasonal celebration. She was cheerful, discussing holiday family plans with colleagues. Around 6:00 p.m., she drove home, the GPS silently pinging on Francesca's phone. Her dinner was simple, a salad and tea, eaten while reviewing lesson materials. By 10:00 p.m., the building was quiet as residents settled in for the night. Teresa grabbed her school bag, put on a jacket, and headed out for her usual walk to clear her thoughts. The short trip to the beach and back was a ritual that grounded her. But that evening, as she approached the entrance of 5 New York Avenue, shadows moved. The hallway was dimly lit, its brick walls muffling sound, the street door slightly ajar due to a broken lock. Teresa fumbled for her keys, her breath misting in the cold air. From the darkness emerged a figure, Kepler, concealed in a dark hoodie, gripping the barbell tightly in gloved hands. He had parked his car several blocks away, having walked the route earlier to time his arrival. The GPS alert had confirmed she was home. Francesca's text, "She's there now," served as the final signal. The attack was swift and merciless. Kepler lunged from behind a column, swinging the barbell in a vicious arc. The first blow struck Teresa on the side of the head, metal meeting flesh with a sickening thud that echoed faintly in the enclosed space. She staggered, keys clattering to the ground, letting out a sharp gasp before pain surged through her skull. "What?" she managed weakly, turning slightly, eyes widening in shock as she recognized the face beneath the hood. But recognition offered no mercy. Kepler struck again, smashing the barbell against her temple, shattering bone and breaking teeth. Blood splattered against the wall, warm and metallic, as Teresa crumpled to her knees. She fought back instinctively, arms rising to shield herself, but the blows kept coming, pounding her jaw, cheekbone, eye socket, each strike sending shockwaves through her body. Her right orbital bone gave way under the force, vision fading to darkness on that side. Teresa's mind fractured into confusion, horror, fleeting memories of Francesca D'Acera. Why? The question melted into agony as blows rained down on her skull, fracturing orbital structures, causing severe brain trauma. She collapsed fully now, body convulsing on the cold pavement, breathing shallow and uneven. Kepler paused, panting, surveying the destruction. Teresa lay still, coat torn, face obscured by blood and bruising. But a faint heartbeat persisted, a grim reminder that life lingered. He dropped the barbell near a dumpster, wiped his hands on his pants, and vanished into the night. With his heart pounding, he rushed to a prearranged meeting spot a few blocks away, where Francesca had called a taxi from Long Beach Livery. The cab pulled up promptly, its yellow light glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Kepler climbed in, giving the driver his Lindenhurst address, his thoughts replaying the blows like a grim refrain. At the Spencer Avenue home, Francesca stood waiting, her face pale but steady. "It's done," he said, pulling her into an embrace. Later that night, they exchanged texts, casual messages laced with dark humor. "She won't bother us anymore," Kepler typed, adding a laughing emoji. Francesca replied with a heart, her complicity sealed in digital ink. In the hallway, a neighbor heard faint thuds and a woman's cry, but dismissed it as wind or loud television noise. It wasn't until 11:30 p.m., when another resident came home, that the horror was discovered. The door opened to reveal Teresa's crumpled body, blood pooling beneath her head. Her breathing labored and bubbling. The neighbor screamed, frantically dialing 911. "There's a woman here who's been attacked. Please, hurry." Sirens wailed through the quiet streets as paramedics rushed in, doing everything possible to stabilize Teresa before racing her to South Nassau Community Hospital in Oceanside. Her vital signs were weak, her body broken. Doctors fought to save her through the night. Scans revealed the extent of the damage. A fractured skull, massive brain trauma, a sunken right eye, multiple broken bones, missing teeth, and internal bleeding. Surgeons performed an hours-long operation to relieve brain swelling, but the prognosis was bleak. Teresa slipped into a vegetative state, kept alive by machines, ventilators humming and monitors beeping in a steady clinical rhythm. Word spread quickly through the school community. Colleagues gathered in the waiting room, crying as they remembered her kindness. "She was the heart of our school," one teacher whispered, clutching a photo from a recent staff party. Long Beach Police Department detectives arrived at dawn. The scene was cordoned off with yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. The hallway told a story of brutality. Blood splattered on walls, keys scattered like discarded worries. The barbell, retrieved from behind the dumpster, bore Teresa's DNA smeared across it. Detective Maria Vasquez, a seasoned officer skilled at reconstructing shattered lives, took charge. She interviewed neighbors, reviewed building security footage, grainy but revealing, showing a hooded figure entering and fleeing. No clear facial features, but the build suggested someone tall and fit. At first, the motive was puzzling. Robbery seemed unlikely since Teresa's purse was untouched, her wallet intact. Personal vendetta emerged as friends cited the lawsuit and family tensions. Vasquez's team obtained phone records revealing calls between Kepler and Francesca. A GPS device was discovered after a tip from Teresa's tech-savvy colleague, who noticed unusual activity on her phone, though it was actually Francesca's purchase records, subpoenaed later, that revealed it, attached magnetically to the car's undercarriage. Its data painted an incriminating timeline. Pings matched Kepler's whereabouts on the night of the attack. His alibi crumbled under scrutiny. He claimed he was home with Francesca watching TV, but cell tower data placed his phone near Long Beach around 10:20 p.m. And the taxi receipt, tied to Francesca's call from an anonymous number, confirmed it. On January 24, 2018, while working at Rikers Island Correctional Facility, Kepler was arrested in a discreet operation, handcuffs clicking shut amid the clanging of cell doors as an officer read him his rights. His face went pale as he was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and weapon possession, leading to immediate revocation of his corrections officer badge. Next came Francesca's implication. The investigation unraveled as interrogators presented GPS logs, the taxi call, and damning texts. She initially denied involvement, saying she only wanted to track her mother for safety, but mounting evidence led to her arrest at her Lindenhurst home on November 11th. Hands trembling as rights were read. "I didn't want this," she sobbed to attorney Jeffrey Prime, though recordings contradicted her claims. Teresa survived nearly 2 years in a vegetative state, draining family resources and morale. South Nassau nurses rotated shifts, gently turning her daily, reading books aloud, hoping for some response. But her eyes remained vacant, gazing at nothing. Medical staff treated infections, adjusted feeding tubes. The irreversible brain damage had sealed her fate. On November 10th, age 56, Teresa Keel died quietly in a hospital bed, monitors falling silent. Cause: complications from blunt force trauma nearly 2 years earlier. Her death elevated charges to second-degree murder for both. Nassau County District Attorney Madeline Singas built her case with precision. DNA on the barbell matching Kepler, digital footprints from the GPS tracker, and testimony from the taxi driver. The investigation, praised for its thoroughness, engaged Nassau County Police Department's Digital Forensics Unit, who recovered deleted messages showing the pair's callousness after the attack. A sharp contrast to the savagery. The looming trial felt like an approaching storm. In Mineola, the Nassau County Courthouse stood imposing, its marble corridors echoing with footsteps of families forever changed. Prosecutor Stephanie Palma, a no-nonsense attorney from the Major Crimes Unit, prepared to lay bare the conspiracy. Kepler's defense, led by Mark Gann, argued entrapment, claiming others had motive from the apartment dispute, and that the GPS was for protection under the restraining order Teresa had against her. Francesca's legal team echoed this, portraying her as manipulated by Kepler's dominance. Kepler's court appearance came first on December 20th, 2019, before Supreme Court Justice Christopher Quinn Dugdale. Facing life behind bars, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy, and weapon possession. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, reporters scribbling notes as he stood expressionless. No remorse, Palma noted afterward, her tone unwavering. On June 30th, 2020, sentencing day arrived. Justice Quinn scanned the packed room, Teresa's colleagues, extended family, a somber gathering, and handed down a sentence of 22 years to life. "You attacked a defenseless woman in a brutal assault," he stated, his gavel striking with finality. Kepler, who might seek parole in 2040 at age 50, was led away. His sturdy frame slumped for the first time. Francesca's turn followed months later. On July 14th, 2020, she entered a guilty plea to first-degree manslaughter. Her words were barely audible as she acknowledged the charges. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but the judge remained unmoved. Sentencing on September 17th, 2020, brought a 13-year term. Parole eligibility in 2031, at age 36, "You meticulously orchestrated the attack on your own mother," Justice Quinn said firmly, his words hanging heavily in the air. "This betrayal cuts deepest." The courtroom murmured, a mixture of shock and satisfaction as Francesca was led away in handcuffs, her youth offering no shield from the law's reach. In the aftermath, ripples spread through Long Beach and Lindenhurst. The school system honored Teresa with a memorial garden blooming with her favorite flowers and a plaque inscribed in memory of a dedicated educator whose legacy endures. Colleagues shared stories at remembrances, how she mentored new teachers and championed struggling students. Her impact remains a quiet legacy. The failed app became a cautionary tale. Legal disputes were settled privately, but the true cost was immeasurable. Kepler and Francesca, now separated by prison walls, faced isolation. He was incarcerated at Sing Sing, she at Bedford Hills, their twisted bond reduced to unanswered letters. Teresa's friends mourned lost possibilities. A mother who would never meet grandchildren, a principal whose wisdom was cut short. The case sparked conversations about domestic violence, the dangers of unchecked resentment, and how technology facilitates betrayal. GPS trackers now scrutinized more closely in domestic investigations. Years later, the hallway at 5 New York Avenue has been repainted, its walls hiding former stains. But for those who knew Teresa, her presence lingers, a resilient woman cherished by her loved ones. Her story serves as a sobering reminder of the fragile line where trust shatters into tragedy, and justice, though delayed, strives to mend what's broken. Ultimately, Teresa Keel's life wasn't defined by her death, but by the kindness she freely gave, a light that still shines in those she touched. Story 7. McWin, Illinois is a community of roughly 220 people, a tiny dot on the vast canvas of the prairie. This is a place where stories aren't written in books, but live in the collective memories of its residents, shared over potluck dinners and conversations at the local post office. Richard "Rick" Young was woven into that fabric. At 71, he was a familiar, if somewhat weathered, fixture in town. He had once served as the community's police chief, a position that, in a place like McWin, involved less chasing criminals and more being a steady, familiar presence, a stabilizing force in the unhurried rhythm of rural life. By 2021, Rick's life had grown considerably quieter. The badge and uniform were long retired. He bore the marks of his advancing years, having battled cancer in the past, and he'd been a smoker for 40 years. His last doctor's appointment was back in 2016. His home was a cluttered house across from a row of storage units. The property belonged to Karen Dubbett, age 79, Their living arrangement was unusual. Rick shared the space with Dubbett and her goddaughter, Marcy Oglesby, who was also his longtime partner. Oglesby, then in her mid-50s, was a woman living between two worlds. In McWynn, she was Rick Young's companion, residing in a home that observers described as squalid, a hoarding situation. But online, within the private glowing world of her screen, she led a different life. For an extended period, she'd been nurturing a long-distance romantic relationship with a Nigerian man named Sunny. This virtual romance, sustained by promises and digital affection, required money, and money was running out for Marcy Oglesby. Resentment began to fester in the cramped, cluttered house. Oglesby felt bitter toward Rick, believing he wasn't paying his fair share of household expenses. At the same time, she saw him as a solution to her financial problems. A plan began to take shape, a scheme built on lies. She convinced Rick that they should pool their resources, sell their existing properties, and purchase farmland together. A classic American dream of retreating to a simpler, pastoral life. It was an illusion she painted with practiced ease. A future that existed only in her imagination. Once she gained access to his financial accounts in the summer of 2021, the vision of a shared future became her personal cash reserve. Funds began to disappear, transferred away to fuel her online fantasy. But draining his savings was only a temporary fix. The scheme wasn't sustainable. As her financial situation worsened, and the amount she'd stolen from Rick exceeded $60,000, a more sinister, permanent solution began forming in her mind. It was a plan that would unfold not dramatically, but through a slow, stealthy drip. It would begin with his morning coffee. The chosen weapon was eerily ordinary. An item found in nearly every American medicine cabinet. A small plastic bottle of Visine. Tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops, works by constricting blood vessels to reduce eye redness. But when ingested, it produces the opposite effect on the body. It causes blood vessels to expand, resulting in a dangerous drop in blood pressure and heart rate. It can trigger unconsciousness, central nervous system depression, and ultimately death. It's a clear, tasteless liquid, easily hidden in a beverage. An invisible, nearly untraceable poison. The poisoning began in the summer of 2021. Marcy Oglesby started asking her godmother, Karen Dubbett, to pick up eye drops for her during shopping trips. The requests were frequent but not inherently suspicious. Then, one July day, Dubbett walked out of the bathroom into their shared home's kitchen. The sight that greeted her was calm, domestic, and utterly terrifying. She witnessed Oglesby standing over the coffee maker, clutching a small bottle, carefully squeezing drops into the pot. Rick was the only coffee drinker in the household. The image seared itself into her memory. At first, the effects were subtle, a gradual addition to his coffee. Oglesby seemed to be experimenting, unsure of the dosage needed to achieve her goal. Rick, already in fragile health, likely wouldn't have noticed the early signs. Mild dizziness, bouts of fatigue, easily attributed to aging. Then in 2021, an unexpected element emerged, a twist that Oglesby would exploit for her deadly purposes. Rick Young contracted COVID-19. The virus, which was spreading worldwide, robbed him of his senses of taste and smell. For Oglesby, this was an opportunity. With his senses impaired, she could afford to be less cautious. She increased not just the eye drop dosage, but added other substances too. She began crushing pills, citalopram, an antidepressant, and mixing them into his food. Rick Young had no history of mental health issues and hadn't been prescribed such medications. The drug, combined with tetrahydrozoline, would create a devastating synergy, accelerating his decline. Rick's transformation was both rapid and deeply disturbing. His once sturdy frame had withered to a skeletal state. He became increasingly unsteady on his feet, frequently stumbling and suffering falls that left his face marked with severe bruises. Oglesby documented his deterioration through a series of selfies, photos that became a disturbing record of a man slowly disappearing before the world. He was becoming a ghost in his own life, his physical strength fading, his mental clarity clouded, trapped in a home where his partner was systematically and deliberately ending his life. By late October 2021, Rick Young's financial resources, once substantial from a lifetime of work, had dwindled to mere hundreds of dollars. Marcy Oglesby had stripped him of everything he had, his money, his health, and ultimately, his life. Authorities estimate he died on or around November 1st, 2021. His long, painful decline ended not in a hospital with loved ones near, but in a neglected home, victim to the person he trusted most to care for him. But for Marcy Oglesby, her work wasn't finished. She faced one final grim task, disposing of the body. The method of concealment was as brutal as it was shocking. Rick Young's remains, now just an empty shell, were placed into a large cardboard box. Oglesby partially wrapped it in plastic sheeting and a bedsheet, and for reasons only she understood, pulled a pillowcase over his head. A ratchet strap was fastened around the makeshift coffin. Then, under cover of darkness, she undertook the laborious process of moving him. She dragged the heavy box from the house, across the empty street, and into Unit 29 of Robert's storage facility. A small, nondescript space secured by a distinctive pink lock. There, amid the cold, dark stillness of the storage unit, Rick Young's body was left to decompose. For nearly a year, Marcy Oglesby carried on with her daily routine. Whenever friends or townspeople asked about Rick, she had a ready story. He had left, she would say. He packed his belongings and abandoned her. To some, this tale seemed plausible. To others, it rang false. Troubling suspicions began growing in the tight-knit community. Rumors started to circulate. Whispers passed among residents suggested something terrible had happened to the former police chief. The truth began to reveal itself in the most basic way imaginable, through smell. By autumn 2022, a foul stench began emanating from Unit 29. It was an unmistakable odor, one that suggested decay. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. People claimed the smell was unmistakably that of a dead body. On October 7th, 2022, law enforcement was called to the storage facility. They cut the pink lock and raised the brown metal door. The stench was overwhelming. Inside lay the cardboard box. Its contents presented a horrific sight of decomposition. Rick Young's body was severely decayed. His facial skin and scalp were partially mummified. His distinguishing features were almost unrecognizable. The rest of his body was covered in adipocere, a waxy, soap-like substance that forms on corpses in moist, oxygen-deprived conditions. His internal organs had nearly completely broken down. Only the heart remained identifiable. The skull was infested with insects. This discovery confirmed the community's worst fears. But it was only the beginning of a complex and lengthy investigation. Identifying the remains posed the first challenge. Portions of thigh and foot bones were sent for DNA testing, which later confirmed the body belonged to Richard Rick Young. The next, and considerably harder, question concerned his death. The body's condition made standard autopsy virtually impossible. Dr. Amanda Humans, a forensic pathologist experienced in numerous autopsies, was tasked with determining the cause of death. She could rule out trauma like blunt force injuries or stab wounds, but with no organs to examine, identifying a natural cause proved impossible. The answer lay in toxicology testing. Since blood samples were unavailable, examiners sent skeletal muscle tissue to NMS Labs, a specialized forensic toxicology facility in Pennsylvania, specifically requesting screening for tetrahydrozoline. The results were staggering. The sample contained chemical levels 6 times above typical therapeutic concentrations found in blood. Though no fatal threshold for muscle tissue existed, toxicologist Dr. Shirkachenko confirmed that for such drug presence in muscle tissue, bloodstream quantities must have been notably high. The toxicology analysis also detected citalopram at 4 times standard therapeutic levels. Death was ruled as tetrahydroprovamacontinuadrosalin poisoning. The case's direction shifted entirely. This wasn't a natural death or a mysterious disappearance. It was homicide by poison. The investigation quickly focused on Marcy Oglesby, and shortly after, implicated her godmother, Karen Dubbett. Both women were arrested on initial charges related to concealing a death. The long journey toward justice for Rick Young had finally begun. The legal proceedings became a complicated maze of delays and strategic maneuvers that tested the patience of McGuinn's community members. Marcy Oglesby initially faced only a concealment charge, but as the autopsy and toxicology results became more definitive, the Knox County State's Attorney's Office, under Ashley Werby's leadership, moved to elevate the charges to first-degree murder. This triggered a series of appeals and legal battles that postponed the trial for several years. For McGuinn residents and Rick Young's friends, who had been demanding justice since he vanished, the delays were agonizing. They were a constant presence at each court hearing, a determined group documenting proceedings, speaking with the press, a silent assembly insisting on accountability for the man they remembered as their chief. The breakthrough for the prosecution came when Karen Dubbett was offered a plea deal. In exchange for her testimony against her goddaughter, the murder charges against Dubbett were dropped. She would become the state's star witness, the only person who could directly connect Oglesby to the act of poisoning. In June 2025, more than 3.5 years after Rick Young's death, the trial finally began. Marcy Oglesby, now 53 years old, chose to waive her right to a jury trial, placing her fate in the hands of Judge Andrew Doyle. The bench trial lasted 3 days, a condensed, gripping spectacle that laid bare the sordid details of greed, betrayal, and a lethally slow murder. State's Attorney Ashley Werby, who had devoted years to the case, first as an assistant before rising to lead prosecutor, presented her argument with meticulous precision. In many ways, this is a story as old as time, she told the judge during her closing statement. A financially motivated killing involving a romantic entanglement. She called 26 witnesses and presented the extensive evidence gathered by her office. She detailed the financial motive, showing how Oglesby concocted a farm purchase scheme to access Rick's money and methodically drained it to support her online romance. She played Karen Dubbett's recorded testimony, describing the moment she witnessed Oglesby adding eye drops to the coffee. She showed Oglesby's selfies to the court, a disturbing progression of images documenting Rick's deterioration from robust health to an emaciated, battered victim. She pieced together the evidence, arguing that Oglesby was a calculated, methodical killer who turned to poison when faced with financial ruin. The defense, led by public defender David Hansen, launched a vigorous counterattack. They argued that the prosecution's case was built on shaky ground. They challenged Karen Dubbett's credibility, pointing out inconsistencies in her story, and noting she only came forward with incriminating information after her own arrest, 3 days in jail, and receiving a plea offer. They aggressively disputed the forensic evidence. They brought in their own toxicology expert, Dr. Craig Chatterton, who testified that measuring tetrahydrosalin levels in decomposed muscle tissue was virtually impossible and lacked proper context. He claimed it was impossible to correlate it with a specific dosage. Hansen ridiculed the prosecution's theory, comparing the gradual addition of eye drops to coffee to putting a few drops of whiskey in a glass of water. You wouldn't get drunk from that, he argued, so similarly, you wouldn't be poisoned by small drops in your coffee. They suggested Rick Young might have died from various natural ailments related to his frail health, conditions undetectable in his decomposed state. Werby responded forcefully. She pointed out that the defense's expert was a paid witness without medical credentials, and that his assessment ignored the lethal combination of tetrahydrozoline and elevated antidepressants found in Rick's system, antidepressants he had never been prescribed. This oversight, she argued, was the chemical fingerprint Oglesby left behind that irrefutably proved her guilt. On the afternoon of June 26, 2025, Judge Andrew Doyle prepared to deliver his verdict. The small McQuinn community sat breathless in the courtroom. The judge found Marcy Oglesby guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of aggravated battery using poison. A wave of relief swept through the room. After years of waiting, doubt, and struggle, justice for Rick had finally arrived. Ashley Werby, who had invested years in the case, embraced Rick's friends afterward. Later, she described relief as the dominant emotion. Relief that justice had finally come for Rick Young. In October 2025, Marcy Oglesby received a 50-year prison sentence. This punishment means she will likely remain incarcerated for the rest of her life. A fitting conclusion for an act of deep, personal cruelty. It was murder, carried out not impulsively, but with cold, methodical intent, like a hunter using an everyday item to slowly erase a life for financial gain. The Richard Rick Young case stands as a stark warning that the most heinous acts can occur in the most unassuming settings, within the privacy of a home, drop by poisonous drop. Story 8. The early days of a new millennium are meant to be a time of hope and fresh starts. For Zeb Wayne Quinn, an 18-year-old from Asheville, North Carolina, the year 2000 stretched ahead, a horizon of possibility. He was a bright and driven young man, participating in an ROTOAC program with dreams of a future built on structure and ambition. He worked in the electronics section at the local Walmart. A typical job for a teenager saving money for his first real taste of independence, a new car. Zeb was a good kid, the kind every parent hopes for. Reliable, and with a clear path in life. His existence followed a steady rhythm of work, training, and the easy companionship of friendships formed in the aisles of a big box store. The night of Sunday, January 2nd, 2000, began with the usual routine of an evening shift ending around 9:00 p.m. Zeb finished his work at the Hendersonville Road Walmart, his mind already turning to the hours ahead. He had arranged to meet with a coworker, Robert Jason Owens, to drive to the nearby town of Leicester to look at a Mitsubishi Eclipse he was thinking of buying. The two weren't close friends, but they were friendly enough, sometimes shooting pool together after work. They met in the vast, lit parking lot, each getting into their own car to drive in tandem to their destination. The last documented images of Zeb Quinn alive were captured by the steady eye of a security camera at a neighboring Citgo gas station around 9:15 p.m. The footage showed the two young men purchasing soft drinks, an ordinary, everyday exchange that would soon become a crucial piece of a dark and perplexing mystery. They left the gas station, Zeb in his light blue Mazda Protege, following Owen's Ford pickup truck, and disappeared into the winter night. What happened next would become the central disputed mystery of the investigation. A story told repeatedly, with its details shifting in each version, yet its dreadful conclusion remaining constant. According to Robert Jason Owens, the only person to ever provide an account of Zeb's last known movements, they were driving on Long Shoals Road when Zeb suddenly flashed his headlights, signaling for Owens to pull over. Zeb told him he had just gotten a page and needed to find a payphone to return it. In an era before widespread cell phone use, this was a common, unremarkable action. Owen said he waited as Zeb left to make the call. When he returned roughly 10 minutes later, Owens reported Zeb was transformed. He described him as panicked, agitated, and urgent. Zeb abruptly canceled their plans to view the car and, in his haste to leave, allegedly collided with the back of Owen's truck, before speeding away into the darkness. That moment, Owens claimed, was the last time he ever saw Zeb Quinn. Owens' story, however, was just the beginning of a series of strange and increasingly suspicious events. Hours after Zeb allegedly drove off frantically, Owens received medical treatment at a nearby hospital for head trauma and broken ribs. He told doctors, and subsequently police, that he had been involved in another separate car accident later that night, though no official crash report was ever filed. The next day, when Zeb didn't show up for his work shift or return home, his mother, Denise Vlaus, her heart heavy with maternal instinct, reported him as a missing person. The following day, the Walmart where Zeb worked received a phone call. A male identifying himself as Zeb Quinn told a co-worker he was sick and wouldn't be coming in. However, the co-worker who answered recognized it wasn't Zeb's voice. The call's origin was traced to the Volvo dealership where Robert Jason Owens worked. When questioned, Owens admitted to making the call but insisted he was just helping out, saying Zeb had asked him to report his absence. After providing this initial strange version of that night's events, Owens became uncooperative, declining to assist further with the police investigation. His story was riddled with inconsistencies, and his behavior suggested someone hiding something. The search for Zeb Quinn had now escalated into a criminal investigation, and Robert Jason Owens was its primary and only person of interest. The investigation soon revealed a complicated web of personal conflicts that added another layer of complexity to the case. Authorities discovered that in the weeks before his disappearance, Zeb had developed a romantic interest in a young woman named Misty Taylor. He had shared with friends and family that Misty's boyfriend, a man named Wesley Smith, was violent and had threatened him upon learning that he and Misty had been communicating. This immediately suggested the possibility of a love triangle turned tragic, a motive as ancient as humanity itself. But the threads of this theory grew even more tangled when detectives traced the page Zeb had received on the night he disappeared. The message had originated from the home of his paternal aunt, a woman named Ina Ustic, with whom Zeb had minimal contact. When officers questioned Ustic, the story took another bizarre turn. She denied making the page and told police she wasn't at her home when the call was made. She was dining with friends, and present at that gathering were Misty Taylor and her volatile boyfriend, Wesley Smith. Adding to the strangeness, Ustic later reported to police that her home had been broken into while she was at the dinner. Though nothing was stolen, several picture frames and various items had been mysteriously rearranged. Was this an odd coincidence, or a calculated setup meant to create doubt and misdirection? No definitive links were ever confirmed between Owens and the situation involving Misty Taylor and Wesley Smith, leaving detectives with two intriguing but seemingly unrelated leads. The investigation was becoming a labyrinth of mirrors, each clue reflecting a distorted and increasingly confusing picture. For 2 agonizing weeks, there was no trace of Zeb or his car. Then, on January 16, 2000, the case took another strange twist. A co-worker of Zeb's mother, employed at the nearby hospital, spotted his Mazda protege in the parking lot of a barbecue restaurant adjacent to the hospital grounds. The scene resembled something from a David Lynch film. The car's headlights had been left on, draining the battery. On the rear windshield, drawn in pink lipstick, was a cryptic symbol, lips shaped like a kiss followed by an exclamation mark. Inside the car, investigators found a living black Labrador mix puppy, a plastic hotel keycard that couldn't be traced to any specific hotel, several drink containers, and a jacket that wasn't Zeb's. The driver's seat had been adjusted for someone significantly shorter than him. To Zeb's mother, Denise, finding the car in that particular spot felt like a taunt, a cruel and intimate message. She, along with Zeb's grandmother and sister, all worked as nurses at the hospital. It seemed the car had been deliberately placed there by someone who knew their schedules, someone wanting one of them to find it. Police collected a wealth of forensic evidence from the vehicle, but it yielded no breakthroughs. The lipstick mark, the puppy, the untraceable hotel key. All were dead ends, bizarre elements in a crime that grew more theatrical and alarming with each new discovery. Later, with help from witnesses, a composite sketch was created of someone seen driving the car in downtown Asheville. The resulting portrait bore a striking resemblance to Misty Taylor, yet this too led nowhere concrete. The case went cold. For 15 years, the mystery of Zeb Quinn's fate remained one of North Carolina's most baffling unsolved cases, a ghost story whispered in the Asheville hills. Time passed. Robert Jason Owens, the figure at the center of the mystery, moved on with his life. He married, established a home, and worked as a contractor, an apparently normal man shadowed by suspicion about his past. That all changed in March 2015, when a new and even more horrific crime tore open the old wounds of the Zeb Quinn case. A beloved local couple, Christy Schumkad, a former contestant on the reality show Food Network Star, her husband J.T. Codd, and their unborn child were reported missing. The investigation quickly pointed to their next-door neighbor, Robert Jason Owens, who had done contracting work for them. The facts that emerged were sickening. Owens confessed to murdering the family in a story hauntingly similar to his version of the incident with Zeb Quinn. He claimed he had accidentally struck J.T. Codd with his truck. He then admitted to the unthinkable. He dismembered their bodies and burned their remains in his wood stove to destroy evidence. Human remains were found on his property. In April 2017, Owens pleaded guilty to the murders and was sentenced to life in prison. The beast who had hidden himself in plain view was finally caged. The horrific nature of the Codd murders cast a ghastly new light on Zeb Quinn's 15-year-old disappearance. The parallels were undeniable. Owens was the last person seen with both sets of victims. He told stories of vehicle accidents in both accounts. Most horrifyingly, he had demonstrated a willingness to dismember and cremate human bodies to hide evidence. Investigators quickly reopened the Zeb Quinn case with a terrible new certainty. In June 2015, they arrived at Owens' property with a search warrant. They excavated a spot where years earlier Owens had poured a concrete slab, telling a family member he was building an unfinished fish pond. Beneath the concrete lay a disturbing collection: scraps of fabric and leather, unidentified solid fragments, and bags of crushed lime, a substance that can accelerate organic decomposition. Though officials never publicly confirmed whether those fragments were human remains, the implication was clear. This was where the answers to Zeb Quinn's disappearance lay buried. On July 10, 2017, after 17 years of uncertainty, a grand jury finally indicted Robert Jason Owens for the first-degree murder of Zeb Quinn. The trial, however, was delayed for years due to staff changes and the COVID-19 pandemic. It seemed a final legal resolution would remain elusive. Then, in July 2022, in a move that shocked everyone who had followed the case for 2 decades, Owens agreed to a plea deal. He admitted guilt to a reduced charge of being an accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he finally told his story, a new narrative he had concealed for 22 years. In this revised account, Owens painted himself not as a killer, but as a frightened bystander. He claimed the love triangle involving Zeb, Misty Taylor, and Wesley Smith was real, and that an angry Smith had enlisted Owens' own uncle, Walter Gene Owens, to kill Zeb. According to Owens, Gene lured both him and Zeb to a remote part of Pisgah National Forest under the pretense of meeting Misty Taylor there. Instead of Misty, they found Gene Owens waiting with a .22 caliber rifle. Owens said he watched in horror as his uncle shot and killed Zeb Quinn. He then confessed to helping his uncle hide the murder, dismembering and burning Zeb's remains in that very forest. Gene Owens had died in 2017, a convenient scapegoat who could never refute the story or be held accountable. Prosecutors were deeply skeptical of this self-serving account, which portrayed Owens as a passive witness rather than the primary perpetrator of the crime. But with no body and the forensic evidence being largely circumstantial after so much time, securing a first-degree murder conviction would have been extremely difficult. They accepted the plea deal. Robert Jason Owens received an additional 12 to 15 years in prison, to run concurrently with his life sentence for the Cog murders. Though the court had to accept his story as the basis for the plea, the district attorney emphasized that the verdict legally confirmed what everyone had long suspected. Zeb Quinn was murdered. The full, unvarnished truth of what happened on that cold January night in 2000 may have died with Zeb Quinn, or it may be sealed within the twisted mind of Robert Jason Owens. His final story, blaming a dead man, is likely just another of his compulsive lies, one more attempt to manipulate reality, even from behind the walls of a maximum security prison. But for Zeb Quinn's family, after 22 years of agonizing uncertainty, there was finally a name, a conviction, and an official end to their son's story. The Zeb Quinn case is a chilling tale of a good young man who encountered evil, a disappearance so bizarre it verged on surreal, and a sobering reminder that sometimes justice, even when partial and disappointing, is the only comfort a grieving family can ever hope to find. Story 9. The emergency call came during the deep, hushed hours of an Indiana dawn, a time when the landscape is draped in muted shades of gray and blue, and the quiet streets of Anderson remain wrapped in sleep. It was Thursday, December 8th, 2016, a day that would dawn cold and brittle. But at that hour, the only disturbance to the silence was the urgent voice on the emergency line. The caller gave his name as Aaron Toller. His speech was a rough mixture of panic and something else, something harder to define. He was at his home on the 1000 block of West 1st Street, he reported. And something terrible had happened. His fiancée, Lindsay Wilkins, was dead. He claimed she had taken her own life. As the first police cruiser arrived, its flashing lights casting the modest home in alternating washes of red and blue, the scene inside presented a picture of chaotic stillness. Lindsay Wilkins, a 33-year-old mother known for her warm smile and a life that seemed happy and full, lay lifeless in her bedroom. She had suffered one fatal gunshot wound to her right temple. The air in the room was heavy with the acrid smell of blood and the oppressive weight of an irreversible act of violence. Scattered across the bedroom floor were pills, a silent, messy indication of a moment of struggle or desperation. But as the initial wave of shock began to recede and the trained eyes of emergency responders commenced their methodical assessment, a glaring inconsistency came to light. A fact so fundamentally wrong, it instantly shifted the story from tragedy to suspicion. In cases of self-inflicted gunshot wounds, the weapon is almost always found at the scene, beside the deceased or dropped from their grasp. Here, in this room of death and disorder, no gun was present. It had disappeared. In another room, untouched by the horror that had unfolded nearby, Lindsay's 8-year-old daughter slept soundly. She had remained asleep through the gunshot, through the frantic emergency call, through the arrival of uniformed strangers, now moving through her home with somber purpose. Her peaceful rest was a poignant contrast to the violence that had just fractured her life. A silent, unknowing witness to a crime she was completely unaware had taken place. The missing weapon, combined with the presence of the sleeping child, turned the home from a site of personal grief into a puzzling and deeply unsettling crime scene. The question hanging in the cold December air was no longer simply what had happened to Lindsay Wilkins, but who was responsible. To those who knew her, the idea that Lindsay would end her own life was not just unlikely, it was inconceivable. She was a woman who radiated life. At 33 years old, she was a devoted mother, with her daughter being her entire world. She was a beloved child to her parents, a dear sibling to 3 brothers, and a friend celebrated for her easy laugh and generous nature. She was engaged to marry her younger partner, 23-year-old Aaron Toller. And while every relationship has its complexities, those who knew her saw a woman focused on the future, not someone trying to escape the present. They couldn't imagine anyone wanting to harm her, let alone inflict such a savage end upon her. She had no known enemies, no hidden troubles that could explain the violence that had taken her away. Her life was lived openly, and within its narratives, they found no reason for her death. This portrait of a happy, stable life stood in stark contrast to the scene in her bedroom and the initial story provided by her fiancé. Aaron Toller, the man who made the emergency call, was the only other adult present in the house. He claimed he discovered her body and insisted it was suicide. But from the beginning, his explanation was riddled with inconsistencies, a weak story that began unraveling as soon as investigators started examining it closely. The detectives from the Anderson Police Department, notably Detective Norman Rayburn, who would play a key role in cracking this case, understood that in domestic homicide investigations, initial statements are often carefully fabricated lies. Toller's proved typical, emotional yet seemingly rehearsed, sorrowful but evasive when pressed for details. Most damning of all, his story about the missing gun kept changing. He admitted owning 2 handguns and acknowledged being on probation, which made possession illegal under his terms. Then, shockingly, he confessed his first reaction upon finding his fiancée's body wasn't to help her or immediately call for assistance. Instead, he collected both weapons and hid them, fearing the consequences of violating his probation. A staggering admission that showed his primary concern was self-preservation amid his partner's violent death, actively tampering with a possible crime scene and removing the most vital evidence. To seasoned detectives, the situation reeked of guilt, not the kind an innocent person feels upon discovering a tragedy, but the fear of someone culpable trying to hide his tracks. Toller's story continued to shift. After admitting to hiding the guns, he changed his narrative again, now suggesting that Lindsay might not have taken her own life after all. He speculated that an intruder could have broken in and killed her. But this revised version was just as unconvincing as his first. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen. The only inconsistencies were Lindsay's lifeless body and the missing murder weapon, which he had just admitted to removing. Within 24 hours of Lindsay's death, the investigation was moving swiftly. Aaron Toller agreed to take a polygraph test. The steady pulse of the machine, with its cold sensors attached to his body, recorded the lies as they flowed from his lips. The result was clear-cut. He was deemed deceptive. His answers to critical questions about the night of Lindsay's death showed unmistakable signs of deception. Bit by bit, the foundation of his innocence was crumbling. Police located the 2 guns he had hidden. Forensic testing quickly confirmed their suspicions. One weapon was a perfect match for the bullet that had ended Lindsay Wilkins' life. It was the murder weapon. During the processing of the crime scene, another damning piece of evidence emerged. His DNA was found in the bedroom, not just in places typical for a resident, but in a pattern suggesting his involvement in the violent event. Investigators also delved into the couple's digital life. They obtained a warrant for their cell phones and discovered, in their text exchanges from the days and hours before her death, the missing piece, the motive. The messages painted a picture of a relationship in crisis and revealed Aaron Toller's involvement with another woman. He was living a double life, and the strain from this deception was intensifying. Suddenly, his behavior made terrible sense. Lindsay wasn't just an inconvenience to sidestep. She was a problem to be eliminated. He could have simply left, ended their engagement, and pursued his new romance. But for reasons buried deep in his dark psyche, he chose a more final and brutal solution. With the murder weapon recovered from his hiding place, his DNA present at the scene, a failed polygraph test, and a clear motive emerging from his own texts, Aaron Toller was arrested. It had been less than 24 hours since he called 911 to report a suicide. Now he stood as the prime suspect in a murder investigation, charged with killing the woman he had promised to marry. He continued to proclaim his innocence, but his denials rang hollow against the mounting evidence. The public was left facing a harrowing truth. The danger had come from within their midst all along. The following 2 years were an agonizing ordeal for Lindsay's family. Justice moved at a glacial pace, a slow, deliberate grind of legal procedures, filings, and delays. For a family consumed by grief, each postponement was a fresh wound, every court hearing a painful reminder of their loss. During this time, Aaron Toller remained steadfast in his claim of innocence. From within the confines of Madison County Jail, he and his legal team clung to the original suicide story, a narrative discredited from day one, arguing that police had rushed to judgment against him due to tunnel vision while overlooking other possibilities. But the prosecution team from the Madison County Prosecutor's Office was meticulously building an airtight case against him. Their most compelling evidence came unexpectedly from within the jail walls themselves. While waiting trial, Toller made a critical mistake. He talked about it. 2 different inmates who shared time with him at separate intervals came forward with eerily similar stories. They told authorities that Aaron Toller had confessed to them during moments of either bragging or despair, admitting he killed Lindsay Wilkins, shooting his fiancée in the head while her daughter slept in the next room. These jailhouse confessions, though often viewed skeptically by jurors, provided powerful corroboration for the physical evidence already gathered. Finally, in August 2018, the trial began. For Lindsay's family, it marked the climax of a 2-year ordeal. They filled the courtroom daily, a silent, mourning family seeking redress for a life taken far too soon. They heard the prosecution present the case, detail by damning detail, replaying the emergency call where panicked tones echoed through the quiet room, viewing the stark, heartbreaking photos documenting her final moments, listening to testimony from the inmates recounting confessions made to Lindsay's mother, 3 brothers, and a representative for her young daughter, now enduring the devastating aftermath of losing her mother to homicide, delivered poignant victim impact statements describing the vibrant, loving woman and devoted parent whose life radiated warmth and compassion. They described the immense void left by her absence, a wound that would never fully heal. They painted a picture of a family torn apart by a senseless act of violence carried out by someone they had welcomed into their circle. Their collective grief was a tangible force in the courtroom, a heavy counterweight to the defendant's hollow denial. The defense's case rested on the increasingly implausible claim of suicide. They tried to undermine the investigation, to suggest that police had made mistakes and that the evidence was circumstantial. But they couldn't account for the most critical flaw in their theory, the missing gun. As one officer later observed, had Aaron Toller simply left the weapon in place and called emergency services, he likely could have gotten away with murder. The initial account would have suggested suicide, and it might have taken days or weeks for suspicions to arise. But his panicked, self-serving decision to hide the gun amounted to an almost explicit confession. It was the behavior of someone guilty. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. The brevity of their deliberation spoke to the strength of the prosecution's case. The verdict was announced in a hushed courtroom. Guilty. Aaron Toller was found guilty on 7 charges, including murder, neglect of a dependent for endangering Lindsay's daughter, obstruction of justice for hiding evidence, and false reporting for misleading police. On September 10th, 2018, Aaron Toller, then aged 25, appeared before the judge for sentencing. The swagger and denials had vanished, replaced by a young man facing the enormous consequences of his actions. The judge handed down a punishment that reflected the brutality and heartlessness of the crime, a maximum sentence of 75 5 years in prison, with at least 60 years to be served. With good behavior, he might eventually qualify for a reduction, but effectively, his life outside prison walls was over. He had traded Lindsay Wilkins' future for a lifetime sentence of his own. In July 2019, his appeal was denied, sealing his fate. The murder of Lindsay Wilkins is a story of profound and personal betrayal. It's a story of how a man, when faced with ending a relationship, chose instead to end a life. It's a story about the lies people tell themselves and others, and the destructive ripple effect those lies create. In pursuit of a new romance, Aaron Toller callously murdered his fiancée, leaving her daughter without a mother and devastating her family. He tried to hide his crime with a cowardly lie, attempting to tarnish his victim's memory with the stigma of suicide. But truth, as it often does, rose into the light, aided by dogged investigative work and confirmed by the perpetrator's own foolish mistakes. Justice was served, but for Lindsay Wilkins' family, the verdict couldn't bring her back. It could only offer the cold comfort of knowing that the man who stole her from them would pay for his crime with what remains of his own life. Story 10. On the evening of July 25th, 2012, a thick, oppressive stillness blanketed St. Petersburg, Florida. The kind of deep quiet that belongs to a southern summer night. The air felt like a warm, damp veil, carrying the sense of wet earth and the distant, salty breath of the Gulf of Mexico. Inside a modest house on a quiet street, where a family was settling into their evening routines, 17-year-old Morgan Tiana Martin buzzed with restless energy. 4 months pregnant, the initial shock of her teenage pregnancy had transformed into a fierce, protective devotion for the tiny life growing inside her. The idea of motherhood had become a tangible reality, a future she was eagerly embracing. Morgan stood at the threshold between girlhood and womanhood, navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence with a spirit her family described as both gentle and determined. She was excited. She had the ultrasound image, a grainy black and white photo that she considered the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It was proof. It was a promise. And she wanted to share it with the person who had helped create this new life. A 24-year-old man named Jacoby Flowers. Their relationship was complicated, hidden in the shadows of their troubled lives. For Morgan, he was the father of her unborn child, someone she hoped would step up and share in the joy and responsibilities of raising a baby. To Flowers, who already supported 3 other children from different women, Morgan and her expected child represented a burden he was unwilling to face. The gap between their expectations was vast and deep, and on this humid July night, it would turn deadly. Shortly after midnight, Morgan's phone lit up with a message. It was Flowers. He had arrived outside. Morgan told her mother, Leah Martin, that she was just stepping out to the porch for a moment. She wanted to show him the sonogram. "I'll be right back," she promised, her words hanging in the still night air. A promise that would be shattered in the most horrible way imaginable. She left her purse on the counter. The precious ultrasound image, the reason for their late-night meeting, sat there as well. She walked out the front door, a hopeful 17-year-old full of anticipation, and disappeared into the darkness. She would never be seen again. Minutes stretched into an hour. The comfortable silence in the house tightened with growing anxiety. Leah Martin's maternal instinct, that sensitive gauge of love and worry, began sounding alarms. This wasn't like Morgan. She wouldn't just leave, not without her purse, not without explanation. A cold dread began creeping into her consciousness. Panic set in sharp at its edges. She called Morgan's number repeatedly, only to have it ring endlessly before going to voicemail, each failed attempt deepening her terror. By sunrise, the grim reality had set in. Morgan wasn't coming home. She hadn't run away. She'd been taken. In the crucial early stages of missing persons cases, there's an urgent race against time. St. Petersburg police were notified immediately. Reports were filed, and investigative wheels began turning. Their focus quickly centered on Jacoby Flowers, the last known contact, who maintained his composure under questioning, claiming innocence while downplaying any connection between them. He insisted they were mere acquaintances, denied paternity, denied intimacy altogether, creating an impenetrable wall against detectives' inquiries. Without a body, weapon, or confession, despite strong instincts among seasoned officers, there wasn't enough to hold him. Flowers was released back into freedom while the Martins faced overwhelming grief and uncertainty. The case cooled rapidly, progress grinding to a cruel halt, unbearable for Leah, whose daughter and grandchild had vanished while the suspect walked free, unaffected. But fueled by unwavering maternal love, she campaigned tirelessly, refusing to let Morgan fade into oblivion. But she organized searches, distributed flyers, engaged the media, her voice strained but steadfast, ensuring Morgan Kiana Martin remained remembered, keeping hope's flame alive against official apathy. Through the passing years, shifting seasons, and society's forgetfulness, she never gave up. For the Martins, life had stopped on that sweltering July night in 2012. The empty chair at their dinner table, the silence in Morgan's bedroom, the memory of a grandchild they would never meet. These were the unchanging constants of an existence forever shattered. Yet, beneath the surface, the investigation had not completely died. By March 2015, nearly 3 years after Morgan's disappearance, the St. Petersburg Police Department formed a new cold case unit. This team consisted of seasoned investigators tasked with reviewing old, unsolved files with fresh eyes and updated tools. Among the first files to land on their desks was the thin folder containing the details of Morgan Martin's case. To these new detectives, it was full of unanswered questions. They began the painstaking work of re-examining the original investigation, re-interviewing witnesses, and scrutinizing the limited evidence with new technology. As they dug deeper, Jacoby Flowers' steadfast denials began to crack. The investigators revisited witnesses from 2012. Memories that had been fuzzy became clearer. People who had been reluctant to speak were now, with time's passage, more willing to share what they knew. A clearer picture of Morgan and Flowers' relationship began to emerge, one that directly contradicted Flowers' claim that they were only casual acquaintances. The breakthrough, however, came from the digital footprints Flowers had unknowingly left behind. Since 2012, methods for recovering electronic data had advanced significantly. The cold case team was able to uncover a treasure trove of information from Flowers' phone records and social media accounts. Text messages and Facebook communications from the days and weeks before Morgan went missing painted a story of a persistent young woman determined to keep her baby, and a young man desperate to escape his responsibilities. The electronic evidence showed that Flowers was far more than a casual friend. He had been romantically involved with Morgan. His messages revealed he had repeatedly begged her to terminate the pregnancy. He was already supporting 3 children and claimed he couldn't afford another. Morgan, however, was resolute. She planned to have her baby and expected his support. Then came the exchange that gave investigators the motive they'd been seeking. In a Facebook conversation, Morgan, frustrated by Flowers' denial of his responsibility, issued an ultimatum. She was 17. He was 24. Their involvement wasn't just morally questionable, it was potentially illegal. Morgan told him that if he didn't agree to pay child support, she would report him to police for statutory rape. For the detectives, this was the key. It unlocked the entire mystery. Jacoby Flowers wasn't just facing another financial burden, he was facing potential criminal charges and prison time. Suddenly, Morgan wasn't just an inconvenience. She was a threat capable of destroying his life. The motive shifted from purely financial to one of survival. In his twisted logic, Permanently silencing Morgan Martin became the only solution. With a clear motive established and a timeline of his lies meticulously documented, the state attorney's office finally had enough to act. On June 23, 2016, years after Morgan disappeared into the night, Jacoby Flowers was arrested. The charge was no longer speculative. It was an indictment for first-degree murder. The legal battle that followed was long and grueling. For years, the case wound through the complicated corridors of the justice system. Flowers, facing a potential life sentence, continued to maintain his innocence. His defense attorneys challenged every development, filing motions and disputing the evidence. The prosecutors had built a compelling circumstantial case, and collectively, it was overwhelming. Finally, in 2022, exactly 10 years after Morgan's death, the endgame arrived. Faced with a mountain of evidence against him, and the likelihood of a first-degree murder conviction, Jacoby Flowers surrendered. Through negotiations between his attorneys and prosecutors, a plea deal was reached. He would admit guilt, not to first-degree murder, but to the reduced charge of second-degree murder, which still carried a substantial sentence, provided he fulfilled one critical condition, revealing where he had hidden Morgan's body. This agreement included a stark and essential term: if he led them to her remains, granting her family closure after 10 agonizing years, he would receive a 25-year prison sentence. But if he failed, the deal would be revoked, and he'd face the 40-year maximum. A moment filled with painful hope for Leah Martin and her family. After 10 years of uncertainty, they were finally on the verge of bringing Morgan home. Flowers provided investigators with a specific location, a remote rural area in Pike County, Alabama, far from the urban streets of St. Petersburg, a place where he believed a secret could stay buried forever. A team of investigators was dispatched, their hearts heavy with the somber task ahead, yet lifted by the prospect of bringing closure. For days, they searched the Alabama countryside. They dug. They sifted through soil. They used every available resource to examine the area Flowers had indicated. Working under the scorching Alabama sun, their faces set with determination. But the earth yielded nothing. The search area was vast, and 10 years of rain, wind, and wildlife had altered the landscape in unpredictable ways. The soil remained stubbornly silent. Despite their most thorough efforts, no trace was found. Morgan's remains were not there. It was unclear whether Flowers had deceived them, sending them on a futile chase as a final act of cruelty, or whether he had been truthful, and the decade-long passage of time had simply erased all evidence of his crime. In the end, it didn't matter. The terms of the plea agreement had not been met. Morgan was still missing. Jacoby Flowers received the maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. Justice, in its imperfect and often unsatisfying way, had been served. The man responsible for ending a young life, and that of her unborn child, would spend most of his remaining years behind bars. But for Leah Martin, the victory felt hollow. The courtroom verdict couldn't heal the emptiness inside her. Her daughter was still out there somewhere, abandoned and alone. The search for Morgan Kiana Martin, the young woman who stepped onto her front porch on a warm summer night and never came home, continues. And for a mother whose love knows no bounds, it always will. Story 11. The town of Wollongong, nestled between the striking forest-covered Illawarra escarpment and the broad blue expanse of the Tasman Sea, was settling into the familiar rhythms of an Australian summer in December 1993. Christmas lights twinkled on the streets, and the air was thick with the scent of salt air and eucalyptus. For the Sowry family, it was meant to be a time of togetherness, a time for shared meals and easy joy. Pauline Sowry, a 49-year-old mother of 3, stood at the heart of this family tapestry. Also known by her husband's surname, Pauline Lawrence, she was a woman deeply woven into the fabric of Wollongong. But as the holiday season reached its peak, Pauline, who should have been at the center of the celebrations, simply vanished. The last confirmed sighting was by her family around Christmas time. There was no dramatic exit, no final emotional farewell. One moment she was there, a constant presence in their lives, and then she was gone. The days that followed became a blur of confusion and mounting dread. Phone calls went unanswered. Normal channels of communication produced only silence. It was a quiet, creeping disappearance, a slow fade that tore a massive hole in her family's heart. Her son, Jason Lawrence, and her other relatives were thrown into a state of agonizing uncertainty. They contacted police, initiating a missing persons investigation, but the trail had already gone cold. Pauline Suri had stepped out her life and into a realm of darkness, leaving behind only questions and a silence that would stretch for decades. The initial investigation proved to be a frustrating exercise in futility. Officers followed standard procedures, interviewing family and friends, examining records, searching for any trace of the missing mother. But there was nothing. No sign of foul play at her home. No suspicious financial transactions. No witnesses to any struggle or abduction. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed her whole. The investigation files grew thick with fruitless reports and inconclusive interviews. Pauline Suri became a ghost, an entry on a missing persons list. Her face beamed from posters that slowly weathered under the Australian sun. For her family, the passing years didn't heal the wound. They only deepened it. The world moved on, but they were stuck in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn or find closure. Each holiday, each anniversary, was a painful reminder of her absence. Her son Jason grew from youth into fatherhood himself, and the joy in his own children's lives was forever colored by the sorrow of a grandmother they would never meet. "Mom has been absent for the birth of her 5 grandchildren and my niece," he would later say, his words heavy with 30 years of loss. "There are so many happy moments she's been absent from over these 3 decades, and we want to bring her home or find out what happened to her." The family's plea was simple, yet profound. They just wanted answers. In 2008, 15 years after her disappearance, a coronial inquest was held to formally examine the case. It was a solemn legal process, an official acknowledgement of a tragedy long endured privately by her family. After reviewing the sparse evidence and the history of the fruitless investigation, the coroner reached a sorrowful but inevitable conclusion. Pauline Suri had died. The inquest found she likely died after an unconfirmed sighting in 1994. For officials, it was a way to close an unsolvable file, to legally define the ambiguous as certain. But for her family, declaring her dead without a body, cause, or perpetrator offered no comfort. It was simply a bureaucrat's stamp on their endless nightmare, a confirmation of their worst fears without truth's consolation. The mystery of Pauline Suri's fate became officially a cold case, and for 14 more years, it would remain buried in New South Wales police archives. Time has a way of eroding everything: memories, evidence, hope. But for certain investigators, elapsed time isn't an obstacle but a tool. Alliances shift, secrets weaken, guilty consciences may occasionally be stirred to confess. In 2022, nearly 3 decades after Pauline's disappearance, a new detective team decided to re-examine the case, forming Strike Force Anthea, a specialized unit with one goal: to finally uncover what happened to Pauline Suri. "We are confident people in this community know exactly what happened to Pauline," Acting Assistant Commissioner Darren Bennett declared. His words a direct appeal to those with crucial information. Perhaps their circumstances have changed, putting them in a position to come forward. Police sent an unmistakable signal. Pauline remained in their thoughts, and they would not relent. The investigators of Strike Force Anthea embarked on the meticulous task of unraveling a mystery that had persisted for 30 years. They re-interviewed people who had given statements, re-examined old leads with fresh eyes, and focused their attention on the harsh, challenging terrain of the Illawarra Escarpment, the striking mountain ridge surrounding Wollongong. This vast area of dense bushland, a place of stunning beauty and deep, impenetrable shadows, was where they suspected the final tragic chapter of Pauline's life had unfolded. From March 2023 to October 2024, police conducted a series of systematic, grueling searches through the heavy vegetation and steep ravines of the escarpment near Fig Tree. For months, their work produced only dirt and exhaustion. Then, in a moment that electrified the investigation, they uncovered something partially buried, protected by the earth for 3 decades: articles of Pauline Sari's clothing. This was the first tangible evidence linked to her since her disappearance, a silent declaration from the wilderness confirming she had been there, and that something terrible had happened. The discovery of the clothing revolutionized the investigation. It shifted from looking for a missing person to pursuing a murderer. In March 2024, the NSW government announced a $500,000 reward for information, leading to the arrest and conviction of whoever was responsible for Pauline's disappearance or death. The substantial reward, combined with renewed police efforts, aimed to encourage disclosures, to break down the wall of silence that had protected a perpetrator for 3 decades. Jason Lawrence, his face marked by both hope and enduring sorrow, traveled from his home in Western Australia to address the media with a heartfelt plea to the community. "My family and I implore everyone," he urged, "if you have any information, to come forward and give our family closure." The appeal proved effective. A crucial tip was submitted to Crime Stoppers, a faint echo from the past that gave investigators a new and unexpected direction. The source claimed to have seen Pauline south of Wollongong, around the time she went missing. She wasn't alone. She was inside a car, a particularly distinctive and notable one, a white 1968 Holden HK Kingswood sedan, reported to be in pristine condition. The image of this vintage car, a gleaming relic from a bygone era, cast a new and intriguing light on the case. Who owned such an eye-catching vehicle in 1993? And who was driving it? Police released an image of a similar car, hoping it might trigger memories and serve as the key to unlocking the secrets of Pauline's final journey. The pace was quickening. The circle was tightening. Armed with physical evidence from the escarpment and the new tip about the Kingswood, the detectives of Strike Force and Thea worked tirelessly to piece together the fragmented final days of Pauline's life. Their persistence finally bore fruit. On Thursday morning, May 29th, 2025, police converged on a quiet apartment complex on Murphy's Avenue in Gwenville, Wollongong. They emerged shortly after, escorting a 64-year-old man in handcuffs. His name was Leon Bueno, and after more than 30 years of silence, he became the first person arrested in connection with Pauline Sari's disappearance. For Jason Lawrence and his family, the announcement was an earth-shattering moment, a jolt of relief so intense it bordered on pain. "We have waited over 3 decades for today's news," he said in a police-issued statement. "We miss her every day, and her absence has deeply affected me and all our family. We are grateful to the officers for never giving up." Assistant Commissioner Joe Kasser, who had promised the family that investigators would explore every avenue, praised his team's unwavering dedication. "The persistence and work by my staff has led to today's arrest," he said, acknowledging the long and difficult road that led to this breakthrough. Leon Bueno was not charged with murder. The charges were specific and grim: accessory after the fact to murder and concealing a serious indictable offense. This meant legal authorities believed Bueno did not personally end Pauline's life, but helped whoever did and deliberately tried to hide the crime. This shocking development suggested at least one other person was involved, the actual killer, who remained at large. In Bueno's subsequent bail hearing, a critical and disturbing detail emerged in court. One phrase that finally provided a motive for the 30-year-old crime. Prosecutors alleged Pauline Suri was taken and killed in the bushland of the Illawarra escarpment because she had come into some money. That simple yet brutal motive, greed, was apparently enough for someone to end her life and bury the truth for 3 decades. The mystery surrounding her disappearance was suddenly recontextualized. This wasn't a random act of violence or a case of a woman choosing to abandon her life. It was a calculated, deliberate killing motivated by financial gain. The arrest of Leon Bueno represents a crucial milestone in the story, but it doesn't end it. The legal proceedings have not begun. The complete account of what happened in that bushland in 1994 has yet to be presented before a judge and jury, and the person truly responsible for the killing has not faced justice. Most agonizing for her family, Pauline Suri has still not been brought home. Her body has never been found, denying her family a grave site to visit, and the essential ritual of a burial to close their long vigil. The investigation into Pauline Suri stands as testament to the enduring power of family love and the relentless determination of detectives who refuse to let a cold case be forgotten. This story proves that justice knows no statute of limitations, just as grief has no expiration date. To her family, she remains forever beloved, a cherished memory awaiting the final, painful truths that will grant her and them eventual peace.